And then we're going to start in our Unit 4 math and talk about what that number means and why we care about it. The math that we see in Unit 4 is area math, measurement math. In real estate, we need to have a basic understanding of measuring, specifically properties, but we also need a basic understanding of lot dimensions and land. And that's where this number comes into place. So the reason we had you memorize this is because we need to know this, not just for my exam, not just for the state exam, but for your new real estate career. I believe I use this number about 4 days a week. So there are 43,560 square feet in every single acre. 1 acre contains 43,560 square feet. And what we need to know to do with this number is know how to convert acres to square feet to acres. They may give you acres and ask you for the square feet. They are not going to give you 43,560. That's a number you just have to know. Please put it on a flashcard. Please put it on a flashcard. I think the trick a couple of you shared with us on Thursday, there are several different methods that we can use to memorize this number, but it seems that the favored method is 4 little old ladies driving 35 and a 60. We've all been behind them, yes? Especially when we're like in a hurry. So 4 little old ladies driving 35 and a 60. Graham's using 7-Eleven, so 4 plus 3 is 7. 5 plus 6 is 11. So 7, 11, and 0. If I have any NASCAR fans, I believe there's a Petty reference in there. I'm not totally sure, but something about if Petty were to go 56, is his number 43. If Petty were to go 56, he would win 0 races. So I don't care. You know, put it on your hand, put it on a flashcard, whatever. But some way we've got to memorize this number. And the reason we need to know it is because we use it to convert from square feet to acres, acres to square feet. Where are my bar fans? Do I have anybody yet? T-bar? A couple of you? T-bar fans rejoice. I have finagled the T-bar just a bit. Is that a question or an accidental on mute? I think that's an accident. Let me grab that. So if we want to take the T-bar and put a slight twist on it, instead of the greater percent going in the bottom right, let's use that magic number that we need to know. 43,560 is going to replace greater percent. 43,560 will always go in the bottom right. Square feet on top. Acres on the bottom left. We have 2 choices. We either know that we multiply 43,560 when we're going from square feet or from acres to square feet. So you would take the number of acres the problem gives you times 43,560. Or we know when we're given the square feet and ask for acres, we take square feet, divide, or we give that T-bar a try and see if we can't maneuver that. One way or another, bottom line, you guys, both of your exams are multiple choice. So all you have to show me is A, B, C, or D. I don't care how you get there. Just get there. Does everybody have this jotted down? Because it's not, see, now we're going to have some fun. It's no fun to talk about it. The fun part is to actually do something with it. So everybody has this jotted down? Head bobs? All right. So you guys go ahead and set your chats for private or just to me. Yeah.
Is multiple a typo? Is it supposed to be multiply?
Multiply, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Delana, I do math, I don't spell, so thank you so much for multiply, yes. Huh. This is slide number 153. Thank you, Rosalind. Battles in my house growing up over spelling homework. battles. It was rough. It was rough. You know what my mom said? You're going to have to learn how to spell. It's not like you can carry a dictionary with you everywhere you go. Ha ha. Ha ha ha. Tells you what era I grew up in. Okay. So everybody have that. Multiply, divide 43,560. Tell me in a private chat. Oops. Tell me in a private chat how many acres are in 21,780 square feet. Private chats. Thank you. Everybody in? Sometimes with this math, if we understand what the question is asking, if we understand what these numbers mean, we may be able to look at the answer choices. I'm not saying you'll be able to get it right without picking up a calculator, but you might be able to look at an answer choice and eliminate one, rule one out just by the fact that we understand the numbers and what they mean. So what do I mean by that? We just said that there are 43,560 square feet in an acre. So with that being said, is 21,780 going to be more than an acre or less than an acre? I may not know much at this point, but what can we determine about that number? What do you guys think? Thumbs up for more than, thumbs down for less than. And I'm seeing thumbs downs, and I would agree, right? So you may not know the answer. You haven't picked your calculator up yet. But at least we know if one of the answer choices was more than 1 acre, then we could eliminate that. So I say that to tell you guys to just read the question, think about the number, think about the answer that you want, and that may help some of those other answer choices make sense. So we'll work it out for you in just a second, but my T-bar fans, if we were to set this up, remember I just took a very small tweak. And instead of using rate or percent, we're going to use that 43,560. I know there are 21,780 square feet. So the question wants to know how many acres. Up, down line, I'm sorry, back, forth line on the T-bar means divide. So you take the square feet of 21,780, you divide it by 43,560, and we get half an acre. 21,780 is less than 43,560. Questions on that? Okay. That was fun. Let's look at another one. Tell me in a private chat how many square feet are in 4 acres. Everybody in? So if I'm looking with, yeah, I got you. You're good, Nicole, I got you. So if I'm dealing with 4 acres, is that going to be more than 43,560 or less than 43,560? We're looking for more than, because every single acre has 43,560 square feet. This acre has 43,560. That acre over there, the acre on the other side of the country has 43,560 square feet. So again, a couple different ways. If you want the T-bar method, we would put a little tweak. We put 43,560. I know I have 4 acres. So what we are solving for is square feet. Up, down line on the T-bar means multiply. Do you take 4 times 43,560? How many square feet are in that tract of land? 174,240. So converting square feet to acres, acres to square feet by using that number. I'll tell you guys right now, if you want to impress your buyer and you guys are out and you got your property data sheet, you're out showing property and you got your information sheet in front of you or on your phone, and your buyer looks at the lot dimensions of this property and they say, I wonder how many acres this is. You'll be able to whip out your calculator and tell them, you know what that buyer just thought? Wow, my agent kind of knows her stuff. I use this number a lot because we do a lot with new construction, and a lot of new construction speaks in lot dimensions, but that's a common question that buyers have. How many acres? So when going from acres to square feet, we divide. When going from square feet to acres, we multiply. Questions? We need to know how to calculate various shapes. Now, this could apply if we are calculating maybe the shape of a room. Maybe we're getting the dimensions and the square footage of a room. Maybe we're looking at a lot. Either way, when we're calculating squares or rectangles, we're only dealing with 3 shapes in this class: squares, rectangles, and triangles. I'll get to triangles in a second. Squares and rectangles, you take the length of the room or the lot times the width of the room or the lot, and that gives you the square foot or the area. Square foot is another way of saying the area.
Miss Julie, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I got kind of confused. So on I think 2 slides ago, we did the acres, with the T's go to square foot.
Mhm.
It said divide when going from square feet to acres, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we did the problem, the one we just did, that was going from square feet to acres, or we trying to find out how many square feet were in a
So the
certain amount.
problem wanted to know, they said, how many square feet are in 4 acres and how many acres are in square feet? So to get from acres or square feet to acres, we divide. To go from acres to square feet, we multiply.
Okay, I don't know why it's confused the way I got it wrote on my paper. Let me make sure I got that top one. How many acres? And yeah, I got it wrote down correctly, and I did it, but we divided there. Okay.
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 See, we get some confusion here. So let me go back. Or if you want to try the T-bar, I don't care how, however you see it. And then the magic number, 43,560. Multiply is that word. So when you're going from acres, they give you acres and they ask you for square feet. You multiply. If they give you square feet and they ask you for acres, you divide. that good?
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Okay, of course. So we did that. Okay, so square feet, when we're asked for square feet, again, just understanding the verbiage. They may ask you for the area. They may ask you for the area. What they're asking you for is a square foot. What's the area of this room? The last one, we did multiply. We took the number of acres times 43,560 and got square feet. With these types of problems, length times width equals square feet. This is basically, y'all remember pre-algebra? That kind of hurt a little bit, didn't it? Pre-algebra is basically A times B equals C, right? And that's pretty much what we're saying here. Length times width equals square foot. Now I got a T-bar for us as well that we'll look at in just a second. But it's important with these that we understand we may come across some different verbiage. When you're measuring land, instead of length, they may say front foot. Instead of width, they may say depth. Whatever the verbiage they use, we're still ultimately looking for the square feet or the area. So either the length times width or the front foot times the depth. Let's pretend that this is our tract of land and you got the road running in front of it. When you were talking about the length or the front foot, what they're referring to is part of the road that run or part of the property that runs parallel to the road. Where's the front of the property? And the front is going to be what runs parallel to the road. So length, also known as front foot, sometimes when we're measuring land. The depth, then, if you stand right here and put your back to the road, what we're asking with the depth is how deep is it? How far back does it go? So length times width, we're saying the same thing as front foot times depth. Yes, Rosalind?
So quick question, is there ever a time that that rule changes in the way that the house is set up?
Possibly in the real world, but for our purposes, the
Okay.
front is going to be, yeah, the front foot is going to be, typically the front foot is the most desirable part of the property. So mostly it's going to be what runs along the street. Now, if we get down east, down to the coast, the front foot might be what runs along the ocean, right? But for our purposes, the front foot's going to be the length. The length and the front foot are always going to be the first dimension given because that's the formula. So squares and rectangles, we're saying length times width equals square foot. T-bar fans, again, I've made a very small tweak. And instead of using rate or percent, we can use the length, we can use the width, and then up top would be our square feet. If you got front foot and depth, then you would have front foot in the bottom left, depth in the bottom right, square feet still on top. I think when they give you length and width and they ask you what the area is, that's not a problem. We know we just need to multiply. However, every once in a while, you guys may come across a practice question that gives you, for example, the length in the square foot and then asks you for the width. And in that case, we have to divide something. So I think the T-bar helps specifically there. But if you remember A times B equals C, then you know when to divide. If not, you got the T-bar. The other shape, the good news, like we said, guys, the only shapes we're dealing with are squares and rectangles and triangles. So the other shape we need to know is that of a triangle. And if you guys can see this with me, can we all agree that a triangle is half a square? for simplicity. We're not getting into obtuse triangles or anything crazy like that, but just a triangle is half a square. So how do we solve for a triangle? Length times width, divide it by 2, cut it in half. Squares, rectangles, and triangles. Again, in the real world, if you're out measuring a property, measuring a listing that you're getting ready to take, not all rooms and houses are perfect squares and rectangles. So often what we have to do is kind of chop up the space on our graph paper to turn them into squares and rectangles so we can determine the square footage. Measuring, the rules for measuring, how it looks like when we measure, those specifics are coming in Unit 8. So this will be a good opportunity to kind of review these formulas, but we're introducing it to you now. So squares, rectangles, and triangles. Questions on the formulas? So with your private chat still set, I got a couple questions for you guys. I want you to tell me in a private chat, what is the front feet of this property, the square feet, and the acres? Question comes in, is this going to be on the test? If we're talking about it, it's in the syllabus. If it's in the syllabus, it's a good candidate for your state exam. Remember, you guys, I wrote this class with the syllabus in my hand, so please rest assured, if we're talking about it, we're talking about it for a reason. Ben? Okay, so we got 3 different things that this problem is asking us. First off, it wants to find the front feet, front foot. Same thing. So the front foot is going to be the part of the road that runs parallel, or part of the property, excuse me, that runs parallel to the road. So the front feet, how many front feet are in this property? There are 150 front feet. Then it wants to know how many square feet. Well, back to our formula. All formulas go on a flashcard, you guys. So we know our formula. Length times width gives us square feet. So length times width, or front foot times depth. So 150 feet times 50 feet gives us square feet. 7,500. This is our square feet. 7,500 square feet. And then lastly, it wants to know how many acres. And I like the T-bar for this one. I'll show you worked out in just a second. But if we take our magic number, 43,560, we now know there are 7,500 square feet. Question wants to know how many acres. That fourth line on the T-bar means divide. So if you take 7,500 and divide it by 43,560, is it going to be more than an acre or less than an acre? It's going to be less than. To have an acre, I have to have 43,560. So how many acres? This one has 0.17 acres. So again, 150 front foot. Perfect. 150 front foot. To find the square foot, we took length times width, or front feet times depth. And then to find the acres, we took the now known square feet of 7,500 and divided it by 43,560. And we decided this property has 0.17 acres. Questions? How we got these numbers?
Could you explain how you define front feet again, please? I'm sorry.
Front feet is the part of the property that runs parallel to the road. There's a question. I actually think it's in unit 3. I'm not sure why, but I do think it's in unit 3. And there's a question that says that they're paving the road and they're going to impose an assessment on the homeowners to pave the road, and you figure out how much your part is. And then the very last calculation they do, they divide by 2. And a common question I get is, why in the world did they divide by 2? Anybody found this one yet? You feel the need to bang your head on the desk? No, don't do that. The reason they divide by 2 is because somebody has a property across the street that's going to share that portion of the road with you. So your across the street neighbor also has part of, I know, right? Also has part of that street assessment. So that's all they're saying. You figure out what it is, the cost per square foot for the pavement, and then divide it by 2, because your across the street neighbor gets to share some of that cost with you. That's good news, isn't it? And again, you guys, if you ever feel if you're about to bang your head on the desk, that's when you reach out to me. Let me help. Another dimension you may see is solving for square yards. To find square yards, we first have to find square feet. How do we find square feet? Length times width. Once we find square feet, then we divide by 9. Square yards is what they use to measure if you were going to go get carpet or tile or laminate, vinyl flooring, something like that. Square yards is the verbiage they use to measure for flooring. So again, length times width. Why 9? Because there are 9 square yards in a foot. Why would we know that, right? That's why we're here. So length times width gives you square feet. Square feet divided by 9 gives you square yards. We also have some verbiage that we need to be familiar with. You guys have probably even heard this verbiage. I know it kind of sounds like math. It kind of is, but it's real more about understanding the verbiage. We may express or quote the price of a property or the price of land by using the verbiage of cost per square foot or cost per acre. What we're trying to determine or what we're looking at with these is the cost, for example, of the entire property divided by the number of square feet. And what that's going to tell us is how much every single square foot costs. This is a good tool for builders to use. It helps them with their costs because they got, supplies and labor and overhead and all these other things. We're going to talk a little bit more about developers tonight. And same thing with land. If you want to know the cost per acre, you're buying a large chunk of land and you want to know how much does each acre cost. So what we're doing, all we're doing is taking, I'm going to start with the house. Let's do a $350,000 house. The cost of the house is $350,000. And let's say it has 2,500 square feet. Cost per square foot tells us that every single square foot it costs to build this house is $140. So this square foot costs $140 and that square foot over there costs $140. All those square feet cost $140. We have 2,500 of it. So based on that, what's the cost of this property? $350,000. So it could give you the cost in the total square feet and ask you what the cost per square feet. It could give you the cost per square feet and ask you what the cost is. We'll see examples in just a second. Again, same thing with land. Let's say you're dealing with $1 million tract of land that's got 50 acres. The cost of the land is $1 million. There are 50 acres total. So how much does each acre cost? $20,000. 1 acre costs $20,000, the other, so on, all 50 of them. So yes, it's a little bit of math, but I think it's more important understanding the concept. Again, the problem could say each acre in a 50-acre land costs $20,000. What is the cost of this land? So then we would take 50 times 20,000 and have the cost of the land as $1 million. Now, obviously, there are other ways to put cost on things. This is just one method. We're going to talk about some other methods as well. So this will come up again. But just having that more about the verbiage, the understanding. So cost per square foot, the cost of the property divided by the total number of square feet tells us how much each square foot costs. If I'm given $140 per square foot, there are 2,500 square feet. What's the opposite of divide? Multiply. So 140 times 2,500 would give us a cost of $350,000. Did I have a question?
Yes, ma'am. I was gonna ask you, you just explained it again. So the million divided by 50, that's the, and then get to 20,000, that's the cost per square foot.
That's our cost per acre by example. So you have this huge tract of land that costs $1 million. There's 50 acres. You as the developer want to know how much does each acre cost? So you would take the $1 million, or if we flip that, each acre costs $20,000 and there are 50 of them. 20,000 times 50 would give us a cost of $1 million. So back to our shapes. Remember, there's only 3 shapes we're dealing with: squares, rectangles, and triangles. So I mentioned earlier, you may come across a shape that doesn't fit, which means we need to chop it up and make it work. The example that we have that we're talking about right now is something called a trapezoid. a what now? A trapezoid. I don't have a formula to measure a trapezoid. So how do we measure a trapezoid? We got to break it up into the shapes that we do know how to calculate. We'll look at one in just a second, but for our purposes, the best place that we're going to see a trapezoid is a bay window. A bay window kind of pokes out from the back or the front of the house a little bit, and you get some more square footage there. If the bay window has a bench, we're not going to be able to count that in our total heated square footage. But in this case, you can walk out on the bay window. Think a good rule of thumb. If you can walk on it, you can count it. So again, more specifics on measurements and all that, measuring houses and properties. We'll get to that in Unit 8. But what we're looking at, if we were to do an aerial view and look down at this bay window, what we're looking at is a shape, and I'm not a drawer, that looks a little bit like this. So then you got the rest of the house, right? It just kind of juts out from the house, and then you got the rest of the room or whatever back here. So we can come in and measure, let's say that's a kitchen, and the bay window is the little breakfast nook or something. So we can come in and measure the room. The question is, how do we measure the bay window? And that's what the trapezoid is. So what we want to do, when I say chop it up into shapes we can measure, I mean, literally, in your mind, I'm looking for one rectangle and two triangles. Does everybody see the shapes that we just took that bay window and chopped it up? We took that weird shape of a trapezoid and I chopped it up into shapes that I can measure. So I got one rectangle and two triangles. Look with me. Let's go to the back of your book. And let's go to page, because there's one in Unit 4, but I want to leave that for your homework so you can have that. So let's go to the back of your book to page 841. And 841 gives you a little bit of an explanation of a trapezoid. And it also gives us the shapes or the dimensions of the shape. So what you're looking at on 841 is similar to what you're looking at on your screen. So the first shape we're going to measure. Let's start with the rectangle. The rectangle, okay, then it is in the section 2 measurement problems. It's in the math facts section. And it's in the section 2 measurement problems. So if we look at the rectangle first, I can see the length of my rectangle is 10, the width is 2. So starting with our rectangle, I have length times width. It is. You got an old version. So you're in the math facts section. It's in the back somewhere. And it's section 2, the end of section 2. So the first thing we did was we just studied that we got to do one thing at a time, right? So let's just start with the rectangle. So we used the rectangle. We saw length of 10, width of 2. So that gave me square feet of 20 for the rectangle. Now we got to look at the triangles. We just said triangles are half of a square. So if we look at our triangles, again, I got a couple different shapes here. Here's one triangle, and here is the other triangle, and we got 2 of them. Does everybody see that? I got 2 triangles in this trapezoid. I just used up 10. You see this base down here is 14. I just used up 10 of that for the rectangle. So how much do I have left? 14 minus 10 tells me I have 4 left, and that 4 is going to be equally divided 2 and 2. So what I'm telling you guys is that 2, how do I 2 plus 10 plus 2 equals 14. We took that bottom base, 2 plus 10 plus 2, and got that 14. So now that I have my triangles, I know the base is 2, the depth is still 2, that didn't change, length times width. But this time, because we're dealing with triangles, we're going to divide by 2. Cut that square in half. So now you got 2 times 2 is 4. Somebody says it's on page 779 of the old book. 2 times 2 is 4. Divide that by 2, and you get 2. We got 2 triangles, right? So we take the square footage of our rectangle plus the square footage of each triangle. How many square feet are in this bay window? 24. You guys got some practice in Unit 4. There's a little bit more in the online learning system. I would not get bogged down on this math. But the way to see it is to chop up that trapezoid. We don't know how to measure a trapezoid. So let's chop it up into shapes that we can measure. Let's measure a rectangle and 2 triangles. Questions? How often as realtors will we actually have to go in and take measurements? Every listing you get. Or you have somebody do it for you. But if you got somebody doing it for you, you need to make sure that they know what they're doing, because ultimately it's your listing. So who is responsible for the information advertised? That's right. So if you're not learning how to do it, you guys got 2 choices, either learning how to do it or you're partnering with somebody and they're doing it for you. They going to work for free? Probably not. But either way, it's ultimately your responsibility. Again, the how-tos and the whats and what counts and what doesn't and all that good stuff is coming in Unit 8. Okay. Everybody good? So we got a couple problems I want you guys put trapezoids away. We're done with trapezoids for tonight. So I got a couple problems I want you guys to look at. I want you all to tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Private chat, please. A, B, C, or D. Give that one more minute and then we're gonna talk about it. So what do we do when we first see a math problem? Pick your calculator up, start playing with the numbers. You don't know what to do. No, just read. Just read. A lot with a depth of 80 feet and an area of 4,800 square feet was sold for $350 per front foot. Oops, what was the total sales price? I'm a visual person. Anybody else like pictures? I like to see both of your exams, my exam and your state exam, you get scratch paper. So my recommendation is that you utilize that scratch paper. So when I see area or lot problems, I like to visualize what it is I'm dealing with here. So I have a depth of 80. I have total square feet of 4,800. What I don't have is my length or my front foot. Now I got my visual and I can see what it is that I'm dealing with. I need to know the front foot. I know that it was 350 acre or per front feet, excuse me, $350 per front foot. The question wants to know what's the cost or the sales price, but in order to solve that, I first need to find the front foot. So the visual helps me see, for me, it helps me see that piece that I'm missing. So I say that to encourage you to utilize your scratch paper. You guys have it. If it helps to draw a picture so you can see. I'm going to use the T-bar for this one because we're dividing something. We'll do it both ways. But if we use our T-bar for our length and our width and our square feet, I know I got 4,800 square feet. What I'm solving for is my length, and I have 80 width or depth. The back fourth line in the T-bar means divide. So my non-T-bar people, your formula is 4,800 divided by 80. And that gives me a width or a front foot, or excuse me, a length or a front foot of 60. This is a great place to go back and check yourself. Length times width, does that equal square foot? 60 times 80, does that equal 4,800? So we know so far, so good. Questions so far? First thing we did was just find our square feet. So front foot, excuse me. So X equals 60. Now we know every single one of those front feet costs $350, right? The problem tells us this. So every single front foot costs $350. And we just learned that we have how many of them? 60. So to find the cost of this building, we take the 350 per front foot. We now know we have 60 front feet. So we multiply them together. We get the cost for this lot, this land, of 21,000 for A. Good.
So you're missing a zero, Miss Julie, but we got you.
I'm missing a zero. I appreciate you guys seeing you see what I see, right? Thank you. It's a little wonky, but 21,350 times 60. Questions on this one? A couple of you tell me in the chat, you see what you did wrong. Awesome. Awesome. And that's always my question to you. If you got it wrong, do you see why? Questions? Can you guys hang tight with me for one more and then we'll take a break? One more and we'll be done with unit 4. Can you hang tight with me for one more problem? And then we'll take our break. Good. Okay. Good. Somebody said drawing it actually helps. Yeah, guys, I'm such a visual person. I could read all day long, but if I can see what I'm reading, especially with math. So if you can see what you're reading, I think it helps. All right, let's do one more and then we'll be done with math for like the week and unit 4. Is that good news? Okay. All right, so let's do one more. Again, private chats. Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. We got one more minute. We'll talk about it. Okay. What did we do first? Just read. Breathe and read, read and breathe. How many acres are contained in a rectangular land parcel that has a length of 175 feet and a depth of 685? So again, I'm dealing with a rectangular piece of land. I know that I have a length or front foot of 175. I have a depth or a width of 685. In order to find acres, we first have to find square feet. So we got to be able to find square feet so we can convert them to acres. So back to our length times width. So my length is 175 by my width is 685. So 175 times 685 gives us 119,875 square feet. The question, though, wants to know how many acres. So now that we have the square feet, and you can't use the trick that will run out in this one because they're all more than an acre, but it's worth looking to see if they're not. But we know there are 119,875 square feet. we know, we have to know that magic number of 43,560. So T-bar or non-T-bar people on our calculators, the back fourth line means divide. So we say 119,875,000 divided by 43,560 gives me 2.75 acres, or A again. That's a great feeling, isn't it?
So more than likely, we will always use the 43,560.
When you're dealing with square feet, acres to square feet, that is your magic number, Angela. Memorize it. Put it on a flashcard. All formulas should go on a flashcard, you guys. Or take a piece of paper in your notebook and write formulas. At the end of the class, I want you to have all the formulas in one place where you can review those. I get asked on the regular if I hand you a piece of paper with the formulas. No, I give you formulas throughout the class. You guys have got to memorize these. It's like seriously, the formulas are like 80% of the battle. If you don't know the formulas, you don't know what to do. Yep, so we converted square feet to acres, and anytime you convert square feet to acres, acres to square feet, we use that 43,560. Questions on this one? So let's go and take our break. When we come back, we're going to wrap up unit 4. We're going to look at where the practice is. So you guys I can turn you loose and you can go on your own. So we'll look at that real quick. And then we're ready to jump into unit 6. So let's take 10. Welcome back. Right, so I'm going to take attendance. Oh, Mark, I just got you. Let's do that again. Nicole, you're in. Ashley, I got you. Okay. So to finish out this section, Unit 4, again, we'll be able to revisit this when we get to Unit 8. Unit 8, we just get more into specifics about measuring, but we're still a ways away from there. So you guys have the opportunity to kind of master this, work on this math. Guys, the other good news is we don't see math again until we get to Unit 8. So you got a couple weeks to work on Unit 3 math, work on Unit 4 math, get yourself caught up. So when we get to 8. So Unit 4, remember we talked about meets and bounds. We talked about the rectangular government survey system, plat map surveys. That's what we're referring to our key terms here, or legal description terms, back on page 71. You got that key point review on page 81, and then you have a student quiz that does have some math. Guys, always remember what I said. There's more math in Unit 4 than what you need to know. So if you come across a math problem in Unit 4 or whatever you're practicing on that we didn't discuss, we didn't go over, don't worry about it. Only focus on what we, fair enough, try to help you rule out some math. If we talked about it, that's the math you need to get. That student quiz on page 82. When are we doing the prorating math from Unit 3? That'll be in Unit 21. So bear with me. We will get there. Also, you got those math concepts on page 80. Math facts, this is the new book numbers. But back in the math facts, this section is the measuring section. So it also goes over area, square footage, those problems. Again, there's more there than what we need to know for your exams. So just focus on what we talked about. And then I also remind you of those 50 problems in the back of the book. New book people, they're on page 865. These are the numbers that relate directly to the math that we just covered. So I tend to think of these 50 problems in the back of the book as like 201. So master the unit first, master the online learning system first, and then stretch yourself and look at these problems, these numbers of the 50 problems in the back of the book. And again, you guys, the key to math is practice, 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 practice. Some of you will say, I make it look easy. Guess what? I can't be with you when you take your test. I'm with you in spirit. I'm cheering you on from afar, but I can't physically be with you doing the math. So I got to wean you off. Questions on Unit 4?
Question:
Yeah.
did I understand you correctly? On Thursday, saying that we weren't following the curriculum was going to go to Unit 20, or did I get that wrong?
No, after 6, we do 20.
After
So
6,
yeah. So let me see who am I talking to? I can't
Benjamin.
see. Say something. Who?
Roxanne.
Hey, there you are. Hey, Benjamin. Yes. So remember, you guys, you can always, if you look at the online learning system, we went from Unit 6 to Unit 20. After 20, we'll do 7. So if you look on the left here, it'll always tell you the order that we're going to go. I also have our tentative schedule. So after Unit 6, we do 20, and then we 7, so we kind of start skipping around. So when we leave on Thursdays, I try to tell you guys what we're covering the upcoming week. But if you don't remember, you can always look at what's next in the online learning system and in our tentative schedule. I go in order of the syllabus, not the book. So that's why it appears that we're skipping around. But the syllabus is what tells us what you may see on your exam. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Thank you, Benjamin. So we got through Unit 5 last week, which means we are starting in Unit 6 tonight. And as mentioned last week, I like Unit 6 because this is the unit that really starts bringing in the broker's role. And we're going to start talking about things that are our responsibility. Up until this point, we've just kind of been building you up, exposing you to terms and verbiage. But now we're going to start talking specifically about what our role is, specifically in this unit, what our role would be for land use controls. So our guide for this unit, we're going to talk about public land use controls. We're going to talk about private land use controls. We're going to talk about the difference of those, how we can differentiate between public and private. A big part of public land use controls is zoning and understanding zoning. And the key to zoning is understanding the terms, the words that go along with zoning. So we'll define those. And then we're going to talk about our responsibility. Again, we actually are bringing ourselves in and what our duties and responsibilities would be for disclosure laws when it comes to land use. So when we first start talk about it, zoning, you know, we didn't always have zoning, but this is New York City. And back in 1915, one of the skyscrapers came to be. And the skyscraper back in 1915 was so tall that it cast a 7-acre shadow over the city. It was built right where the sun rises or sets. I can't tell you which one, but it cast a 7-acre shadow over the city. And that's kind of what got the idea of zoning. This is kind of what got New York thinking about zoning, and obviously the rest of us followed suit. So zoning just kind of helps regulate various city controls, land use controls, etc. When it comes to zoning, zoning is a public land use control, and it's regulated by our police powers. One of the keys in understanding the land use controls is how it's enforced. So if you know somebody violating zoning, it's enforced by calling law enforcement. It's enforced by getting the cops involved. Maybe you have a case, maybe you don't. I don't know. We're not going there. But it's enforced. Public land use controls are going to be enforced through these police powers. Their whole purpose is to protect the public health, safety, and general welfare of their citizens. Understand that each city or each town or each municipality has its own master plan. Where do we see ourselves in 20 years? And what do we need to grow? What do we need to do to meet that goal? Were you guys ever asked in high school, where do you see yourself in 10 years? That pretty much they were asking you your master plan, right? So that's kind of what answers the question for the city. Where do we see ourselves? And zoning is approved or not approved based on that master plan. The question with zoning is, does it fit with the master plan? Does this fit with the picture of where we see ourselves in 20 years? Zoning laws are imposed by the local government. Zoning is local in nature. There's no statewide ordinances. There's no countywide ordinances. Each city, each town, each municipality sets its own master plan, determine its own zoning. And again, it regulates and controls how we use the land, how we build those structures, because bottom line, it's got to fit in that master plan. And we don't want interference to other members of the public. So back to unit 2, you said you own fee simple absolute. You can do whatever you want to as long as it's in the confines of the law. Well, guess what? Zoning is the law. So step 1 with your fee simple absolute property, what is it zoned for? And that's what we're talking about. Zoning changes, and zoning needs to be flexible so that it can change. As cities change, as cities grow, or as cities lose, how does that zoning meet those changes? My Winston-Salem people, this is the power plant downtown. Today, the power plant is some nice apartments. How many years ago was the power plant an old RJR warehouse? RJR moved down, they moved out of Winston. We had that industrial section. They redid zoning to allow for residential. And now we got some nice apartments. We got some good things going on downtown Winston-Salem that we probably didn't have, what, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. So zoning's got to be flexible. We got to be able to change and adapt zoning to our current needs of the city. I think we're seeing this a lot, not just Winston. Do I have any High Point people on the call? Are we not blown away with downtown High Point? They finally gave us a reason to go downtown. 10 years ago, they were saying, come to downtown High Point. We were going, for what? There's absolutely nothing to do unless you're furniture market twice a year. Today, we have stadium and restaurants and breweries, and we have all sorts of good things coming to downtown High Point. Zoning had to change to make those adoptions, to make that meet. So the North Carolina Enabling Act is the act that says zoning is local in nature. So what I'm telling you guys is Raleigh is not going to come to Winston-Salem and say, this is what y'all zoning needs to be. Winston-Salem gets to dictate Winston-Salem's zoning. They're going to keep Raleigh and Raleigh. Let Raleigh handle Raleigh. We got it up here in Winston. And I do think this is a problem topic. Zoning is local in nature. Does that mean zoning must also meet the affordability of residents? I'm going to say it depends. If the zoning passes, then I'm going to say there's a need for it. And we're going to talk about zoning changes in just a second. But often, before they change a zoning, they want to hear from the public. They want to know what the public has to say. And hopefully that complies, that conforms to their residents. So zoning is local in nature. Each city, each town, each municipality is free to set their own zoning. There are no statewide zoning ordinances. Now with zoning, we have some general classifications, big picture, residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural. Quite often, these general classifications are divided into subclasses. So you may have residential zoning with a density, for example, be like RS 40 or something. Not going to get worried about the verbiage of zoning because each city is different. So what I tell to you guys is once you get licensed and you affiliate with a firm, which we will talk more about that, they're going to help you know where to go to find this zoning. They're going to help. You're going to have a checklist. What do I need to look up before I list a property? And one of those things on your checklist is probably going to be zoning. So they'll help you learn where to go. I don't know what city you're in. Thus, I don't know what your zoning is. I don't know where you can find it. That's why we're not getting into that in this class. But just rest assured you will get assistance once you are licensed and you're out working with buyers and sellers. We may also see mixed zoning. You may have residential and commercial. So again, yeah, Corey. So again, downtown, you have restaurants and businesses on the ground floor, and then you have people living on the second floor up. So mixed zoning allows multiple different types of general classifications. Again, the subclasses break down specifics. You know, an example of a subclass for a commercial might be retail. So what, not any commercial is allowed here, it's just retail. That could be a subclass. So now what we're going to do is talk about some zoning terms. We're starting on page 112 with some zoning terms. I do recommend zoning terms eventually wind up on a flashcard. I don't know that you're trying to do that tonight or not, but just having a basic understanding of the zoning terms, the zoning words. So the first zoning term we have is cluster zoning. This is what we usually see in a cul-de-sac. If you can slightly reduce those lot sizes, you can increase your open spaces. That cul-de-sac, that zoning allows us to get more properties around than if we didn't have a cul-de-sac, we just had the end of the street there. So cluster zoning reduces those lot sizes just a bit to give us open space. Best example, the only example of a cluster zoning is our cul-de-sac. Another zoning term is a buffer zone. There's usually a strip of land. That land is protected, meaning you can't go tear it down. You can't take your chainsaw. It's a protected area, but it separates two types of zoning, one zoning from the other. I think the most common example is separating a residential from a non-residential. So you guys see the red line here going around this strip of land. This strip of land here is your buffer zone. You got residents back here. Looks like you got some kind of industry, something over here. But this buffer zone, and again, this buffer zone is going to be protected. So these people that live here can't run across the street and like chop those trees down. The city's protecting them. So it's a buffer zone just to separate those two different types of zonings. This is just one example. ETJs are extraterritorial jurisdictions. These are areas outside of the city, usually rural, usually not heavily populated. They're not popular enough to have their own zoning. Maybe they don't even have their own government. So they're going to kind of piggyback off of whatever city they're close. They're not in the city limits, but they still honor and recognize that zoning. ETJs are usually 3 miles, up to 3 miles outside of the city. If that area is ever annexed, now it's part of the city. They've taken that and they've incorporated in the city. The ETJ goes away, and now they're in the city limits. Again, think small population, rural. They don't have their own rules. They need somebody to make the rules up for them. So they just rely on the city that they're adjacent to. Another zoning term is non-conforming use. See that first. We have two different types of non-conforming use. Neither one of them are conforming, but one is legal, one is illegal. One is okay, the other one is not. When it comes to non-conforming use, it may help to draw yourself a timeline. A legal non-conforming use, the use was in place. No, you've been doing it this way, or your granddaddy or whatever has been doing it this way. The use has already been in place. Then they came along and changed the zoning. They came along and changed the rule. With a legal non-conforming use, this homeowner or this property owner is going to be grandfathered in. They're going to be allowed to keep their current zoning until they either sell it or they submit for major repairs, permits for repairs. We're going to talk about permits in just a second. Have you ever been in a residential neighborhood and there's like this old rundown gas station on the corner? It doesn't really look like it belongs. it's very well that gas station is operating under a legal non-conforming use. When that gas station was built, the zoning allowed it. And then somewhere along the line, they changed the zoning, but they're not going to make that gas station shut down. Now, when that gas station owner wants to sell it, they're probably not going to let the new owner run it as a gas station because it's no longer zoned for that. If that gas station owner wants to do major renovations, major repairs, their permits probably won't get approved because the zoning doesn't allow for that. So legal zoning, the use was in place before the rule. Illegal zoning then, the rule was there. You knew darn well what the rule was, and you went and changed the use. Let's say you want to buy a house. No, better yet, let's say you're working with a buyer that wants to buy a house, and the buyer tells you they have a goal, a plan within 3 years to convert their garage into a hair salon. Don't we have a duty to help that buyer verify that that zoning will allow that? Isn't that part of what we're hired to do? We're going to talk about our buyers and use. We're going to talk about my responsibilities. But what if they don't share? I only know what I know, right? So what if they don't share? They buy the house. They know darn well this zoning is residential only. And then they open up that commercial hair salon. They knowingly or unknowingly, doesn't matter, violated the zoning. That's an illegal non-conforming use. The rule was in place. They knew what the rule was. They went and did a zoning, a use other than the zoning. Somebody says about a home daycare. Absolutely. That's a commercial use. So if you're going to do anything with your home that could be considered commercial use, non-residential, we'll say, before you do that, you need to make sure the zoning will allow it. If your neighbor is running a daycare and you're tired of all those kids on your street every day between 2 and 4, check your zoning. What did we just say? If the zoning doesn't allow it, who do you call? Yeah, get the law enforcement involved. That's the only thing. I mean, you could go and knock on the door and say, shut your daycare down, but what are they going to say? Okay. So how do we enforce zoning? Zoning is a public land use control, and it's enforced through local law enforcement. Please wait till tomorrow to do that. Don't call the cops now, you're in class. Some of you are looking out the window right now at your neighbors going, oh, wait.
Question, but there are permits that will allow them to have that daycare or commercial use.
So they could request, sure, they could always go to the zoning board, but that would be a special circumstance. So bottom line, if it's zone residential, that's all that's allowed there. Residential just means you're allowed to live here. If you had a mixed use, then maybe you can have the daycare. Kind of, sort of, a little bit what Becca was just referring to here. Kind of, sort of. Another zoning term is something called a variance. This is asking permission to break the rules. One, that's the key. That's the key. One property owner goes to the zoning board and says, the way your zoning is set up does not allow me to use the property, my property, the way that I want to. Can I have a variance? Can I have permission to break the rules? Now, why I said kind of, sort of, because not only does that one property owner have to go to the zoning board, but they have to prove a unique hardship. They have to prove that their land cannot be used because of the zoning. So I want to open a daycare may not be considered a unique hardship. for example. We got an example we'll look at in just a second. So again, they go to the zoning board. That one property owner goes to the zoning board and pretty much asks permission to break the rules. And if they're granted that permission, they're granted a variance. They are given permission to use their land. So let's look at an example. Henry is a real estate developer. He purchases a large warehouse to convert to a 12-unit apartment building, a use that is allowed by zoning ordinances in that area. So far, so good. However, there's an on-site parking requirement of 2 parking spaces. Since the warehouse takes up much of the land, Henry can only create 12 parking spaces and thus would not be in compliance with the parking requirement. Henry's option may be, I don't know, I'm not the zoning board, I can't tell you if it'll pass or not, that he may want to go and request a variance. Winston may approve it, Greensboro may not, right? Because zoning is local in nature. So it just depends on the zoning regulation, the master plans for that area. Question comes in about legal non-conforming use. They can cash you out because if it burns down, you can't rebuild. Yeah. So if you have a legal non-conforming use, you're not going to be able to, like we said, do major repairs, tear it down and start over if it burns down, because you're not conforming. You're just legal because you were there before the rule changed. So with a variance, one property owner is asking permission to break the rules. And they're doing so because they have a hardship, not just because they wanna. They're gonna wanna see, they're gonna wanna hear what that hardship is. Another zoning term is a special use permit. Now we might be dealing with one property owner, we might be dealing with multiple. We're asking permission to use the property in a special way because it would benefits the public's interest. With special use permits, I always think of like hospitals, churches, schools that might be in an area zoned residential. They may ask permission, they may ask for a special use permit because putting a hospital in this area could benefit the public. Putting a church or a school could benefit the public. Again, we got to get permission from the zoning board. And the big question is, does it conform to our master plan? Because I'm telling you right now, if it doesn't fit with the master plan, the zoning board's got an easy answer, don't they? Because that's what it all goes back to, is that master plan. So if we look at an example, Little Ones purchases a lot in a residentially zoned area with plans to build and operate a new daycare center to serve 50 children. The zoning ordinance permits a daycare center, but only as a special use. Little Ones will first need to apply for the special use permit. If all the requirements are met, then the permit should be approved. Another zoning term is a zoning amendment. Please write that down. Put zoning aside for a second. An amendment, if you're amending something, it's a change. An amendment is a change. So a zoning amendment then is a request to change the zoning. Maybe it's been zoned industrial back to our power plant 64 that used to be the RJR warehouse. Back in the day, the RJR warehouse, it was zoned industrial. RJR moved on. Now that plant sat empty for how many years? A zoning amendment was proposed and passed to allow for residential. Developers came in, and today we have Power Plant 64. Typically, when there's a zoning amendment on the table, this is when they're going to bring the public in for a public hearing. You guys start paying attention as you're driving around. You're going to start noticing, especially if you're in an area like the Triad that's growing, you're going to start seeing zoning amendment signs. So they're either white signs with red Z's or red signs with white Z's. And what those signs are doing is alerting you to the fact that there's a public hearing. There's a proposed zoning amendment on the table. And before it's passed, they want to hear from the public. They want to hear from the people that live there or the people that work there. So anytime you see one, especially when you live there, you may want to get that information, go to that public hearing and see what they're proposing. And if you want to weigh in, that public hearing is your opportunity to speak out. Once it's passed, if it's passed, then it's been rezoned. And whatever the new use is, will now apply going forward. So an amendment is a change. We're going to see that word again in Unit 10. So an amendment is a change.
Miss Julie, I have a question. So I know a few months ago on the news, they had, they was in a neighborhood and they were holding up signs saying no zoning. Is that what this is right here?
They may be saying no zoning amendment. We don't want this change.
All right.
And that's it, because we as people in general don't like change too much, do we? And then when they want to come and change our neighborhood, that's when we're going to whip out our signs and go to the public hearing. A lot of times, sometimes these are fought. I mean, sometimes the people welcome them. Sometimes they don't. But yeah, that's probably exactly what that is, Sandra. There was a zoning and they didn't want that change. Friendly Avenues rezoning. Yep. Yeah, like I said, here in the Triad, you don't have to go far to see those zoning signs. And now that I've pointed them out to you, you guys are going to start noticing them. You know, if you're, like I said, if you live in that area, if you want to work that area, you want to market that area, be worth looking into. You can go to that city's zoning, just Google that city's zoning, and it'll probably tell you when the meeting is, or you can pull over and take a picture of the sign safely, please. Another zoning term is an overlay district. This is when one type of zoning is superimposed over another. So you have two or more zonings over the same area. For example, you might have a residential area and a historic zoning area. You might have a residential and a flood zone. We're going to talk about historic next. But you have, it's an overlay. You have two different types of zonings. You guys remember this thing? I always think of this thing. This is, and if you don't, please don't tell me because it just makes me feel old. This is projectors before we had projectors, right? Y'all remember this thing? And they take these transparencies and they laid them down on the glass. And then this light would come on that was brighter than the sun, and it would project what was on this glass out into the wall so you could see it. And then every once in a while, we got these kooky teachers that took two transparencies and put them on top of each other. That's what we're talking about. That's what I always think of with an overlay district. They probably weighed about what? I'm exaggerating. 70 pounds or something. I mean, those things were like, may not be too far off. I don't know. Good. Another zoning term is our historic preservation. The whole purpose of historic zoning is to keep it looking historical. Keep it looking like it did back in the day. So if you live in an area that's in a historic zoning district, all changes to the exterior must be approved by the historic zoning board before you can make the change. So again, my Winston-Salem people who are familiar with Old Salem. Do y'all know people live in Old Salem? Those houses that you walk by, yeah, people live there. And outside looks like Old Salem. Now you walk inside, it's like going through, 4 different centuries at the all at once. Because inside is usually modern, up to date. They're nice inside. But the historic zoning wants to keep Old Salem looking like Old Salem. They want to keep that historic. So again, any changes to the exterior need to be approved by the zoning board. The materials, the colors, whatever they were using back in the day. And if we look at an example, you may see the historic district may give us verbiage, for example, no exterior portion of historic properties can be erected, altered, restored, moved, or demolished until after a certificate of appropriateness has been submitted to and approved by the Historic District Commission. So you got to follow the proper channels. Each historic zoning district is different. Most cities have some type of historic zoning. What they will or will not allow. Another zoning term is aesthetic zoning. This is for appearances. Trying to keep everything look pretty. So it might be, they say all commercial buildings downtown have to be brick, for example. That would be an aesthetic zoning. I know some towns have a height restriction on their signs. They don't want, those golden arches and Burger King and Wendy's blocking our view of the pretty sky and the skyline and everything. So you're going to say no signs higher than 3 feet or 5 feet or whatever. The whole point of that is keeping it pretty. Somebody asked about an HOA. Not yet. We're going to talk about HOAs because HOAs are private land use controls. So we will talk about HOAs in just a second. Yep. So aesthetic zoning, we're just trying to keep everything looking aesthetic, keep everything looking pretty. And then our last zoning term here is spot zoning. Again, one or more properties is rezoned to permit a different use from the neighboring properties. Once again, it's legal only if it's in the public's best interest. So the best example we have of a spot zoning might be a playground at the end of the street. Maybe a playground at the end of the cul-de-sac in the development. Designed for the neighbors, to be able to have somewhere to play. All have to be approved by the zoning board. So again, you guys, we just rattled off some zoning terms. Remember, you got a glossary in the back of your book as well. So be utilizing that. That can help simplify some of this verbiage in the book. I know sometimes it goes on and on and on. So the glossary in the back. But I do recommend having these on flashcards just so we have a basic understanding. If you see a test question on one of these terms, they're probably going to give you a scenario and then ask you which zoning term does this apply to, A, B, C, or D. Are businesses able to be spot zone, or is that just for public use types of situation? As long as it's that's going to have to be their defense if it's in the public's best interest. So could a business request a spot zone? Maybe, but they're going to have to prove that it's in the public's best interest. And again, it's all got to conform to that master plan. Can you get access to the master plan? That's a fantastic question. So what you may want to do is go to type Google after class, your city's zoning master plan. I don't know if that's public records or not, but that's a great question. I'd like to think, since I'm a member of the public and it's in my best interest, that they would share that with me, but I don't know that for sure. So zoning, and what does this mean for us? Well, we have a duty to disclose zoning. We're just introducing you this idea of disclosing stuff. One thing we as real estate agents, brokers have a duty to do is to disclose zoning. What does it mean to disclose?
Tail.
Yeah. Yeah, I got you guys come in the chat. Thank you, LaDawn. Yeah, it means you're telling, you're informed, you're letting them know. So what's our duty? To tell what the zoning is for this property, this address, this whatever you are brokeraging. So we have this duty to disclose zoning. Specifically, if you're working with the seller, you're a seller's agent, we have a duty to always check zoning before we can list a property. The service that we put our listings in, we will talk about, but the service we enter our listings, zoning, is a required field, meaning I can't activate my listing until I have zoning in there. That property zoning, what's allowed, what use is allowed. Don't assume, listing agents, look it up. Again, your firm will direct you. They'll help you with that. Don't worry about that. Remember those goals. Before you can list a property, you got to pass a state exam. Before you pass that state exam, you got to pass this end of class exam. Buyer's agents, for the most part, should be able to rely on the information that the listing provides, that the listing service provides. So for the most part, buyer's agents should be able to rely on what the listing agent put in. However, if your little red flag goes up and you have a question about what you're seeing as a buyer's agent, you now have a duty to verify that's right. As a buyer's agent, who do you represent? The buyer. So you're a buyer's agent, your little red flag goes up and you go, I wonder if that's right. That, I just sold a house half a block down, last year, and it didn't seem that was right. You have a duty to go look it up. Also, buyer's agents. If your buyer has a specific end use, remember that buyer that wants to convert their garage into a hair salon? They gave you a pretty specific end use, didn't they? Buyer's agents, if we have a specific end use, then we have a duty to verify that their end use can be met. I try to operate by a couple simple, super philosophies. And one of my super simple philosophies, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. If it's important to my seller, then it's important to me. So if your buyer shares with you this end use, or if either one of you question that zoning, then we have a duty to verify that as well. Again, more about disclosing. We'll talk all about disclosing when we get into Unit 7. Just some verbiage, urban or rural. Urban is usually considered in town. Rural is considered out of town. Zoning can vary. Downtown zoning is going to look different than out of town zoning. So again, as we said, part of real estate agents is we need to be the experts of our market. Wherever you want to work, you need to be familiar. I'm not telling you need to memorize the zoning, but we need to be familiar with it. We need to go where to find it. We need to be aware if zoning changes. We need to be aware when we're leaving downtown and we're heading into a rural area. We are the experts of our market. Consider this, you guys. Houses come and go. Listings, sellers, buyers come and go. We are here in the market. We are here in the area. And that's ultimately what we're selling. So let's look at a quick example. An owner hired a broker to list a vacant building previously used as a computer repair shop. A prospective buyer asked the broker if a manufacturing company could operate in the building without investigating. Do we see where they went wrong? Without investigating, the broker said, yeah, that's fine, no problem. You shudder a little bit? I hope so. Good. The buyer made an offer, seller accepted, and a contract was formed. Luckily, prior to closing, the buyer discovered the zoning was commercial, a class that excluded manufacturing use. Who do you think that buyer is calling first? The broker that said yes. Never assume, never guess. Well, I sold the house a block away and that was that zoning, so I know that this is this zoning. There's a line somewhere. What if that line is between this property and that property? So that's why we have this duty to verify, never assume. When in doubt, find out. Another super simple philosophy for you. When in doubt, find out. We can help them get the information. You know, one thing we're going to learn as brokers, I'm a fact finder. I help my buyers and sellers gather the information, find the facts so they can make an informed decision. I'm not the one buying this house. I'm not the one selling this house. I'm assisting them in that transaction. And that's where we're starting to head with our agent duties and responsibilities. Questions on zoning? All right, let's take 10. We come back, we're going to talk about subdivisions. Welcome back. It's chilly out there. I just ran my recycling out the can. When I say ran, that's exactly what I did. It's too cold to be walking out there right now. Because I couldn't wait till tomorrow, apparently. I had to do it tonight. You guys do that? You get something stuck in your head? Just do it. All right, welcome back. So I am going to take attendance. Oops. And we're on 3 screens tonight. So make sure I get everybody. Yeah, slow as 16, snow up in the mountains. Yep. Graham, I've heard of snow up in the mountains. Y'all leave your faucets dripping tonight. If you're getting down to 16, just a drip, cold water drip. Doesn't have to be nothing crazy. Because plumbing issues are not fun nor cheap. So, okay. So we've talked about zoning. Zoning is one public land use control. Another public land use control is when we talk about subdivisions. Please listen to me. When we're talking about subdivisions and public land use control, we're talking about the creation of a subdivision. We will talk specifics about the subdivision and the HOA in just a second. In this section, we're talking about the creation of subdivisions, and that is a public land use control. I see you guys writing very, very hard. You can either do that or you can look on page 116, second paragraph under subdivision regulations. I pretty much just copy and paste. So you got it right there in your book. So to start with the creation of subdivisions, the first thing we need to do is define what a subdivision is. So a subdivision is all divisions of a tract or parcel of land into 2 or more lots. Maybe you're taking a piece of land, you're dividing it into 2 lots. Maybe you are taking several adjoining tracts of land and converting them into like 150 lots. They're subdivided for the purpose of building development. It does include all division of land. We subdivide that land, and the dedication of a new street or the change in existing street. We may be that we can use the streets we have for this subdivision, or maybe we need to create new streets. There's a couple exemptions that fall under that definition of a subdivision. If the land is 10 or more acres with no street right away, then it's not under the definition of a subdivision. If the land has no more than 2 acres, no more than 3 lots with those streets right away, again, it's exempt. It's not under that definition of a subdivision. With that being said, I would not get too bogged down on this because most of what we deal with is going to fall under that definition of a subdivision. And what's so important with the creation of subdivision are streets. So we'll talk about streets and roads in just a second. So you're a developer and you decide you want to build a new subdivision. Understand, you guys, there's a whole lot that goes in to a subdivision before you and I ever start seeing that equipment show up to start working and clearing the land. It might be that the developer was working on this in some cases for years before they finally get that permission to start building. So it's not like you're going to wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to create a subdivision and get to work. It's a process and it takes time. We're not going to go over the whole process, but we're going to get just a basic idea. So first off, where we need to start first is with the zoning board. The developer needs to go to the zoning board and ask for permission. And the question the zoning board is going to ask is, does it comply with our master plan? Does this fall into where we see ourselves in 20 years? Once we get, or the developer gets permission from the zoning board, one of the early things they're going to do is create this plat map. The developer at first may have preliminary plat maps. meaning they are subject to change. You start with the initial draft. The initial draft gets pre-approved by the zoning board. You talk to a surveyor, you talk to your engineer, you talk to all the people that are in your village as a developer to create or edit these preliminaries. The developer may make the preliminary plat map available to potential buyers when they're trying to sell subdivisions, the new lots, very, very early buyers in the subdivision. But understand, we have to have a final plat map. Final approval needs to be recorded. It needs to be public record before the first lot is closed on. Before the very first buyer buys the very first property in that subdivision, this plat map needs to be finalized and recorded. Can we all agree with the statement that a buyer deserves to know what they're buying? The buyer has the right to know what they're buying. Could we agree with that? So if you're buying in a subdivision and we're dealing with preliminary plat maps, which means they're subject to change, does that make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, knowing as the buyer that it could change? No, probably not. So they're going to require final plat maps recorded before the first property, before the first lot is sold to the first buyer. We could go under contract with a preliminary, but if there are major changes, the developer needs to give that buyer the option to terminate because they changed what they had promised. So again, bottom line, that final plat map needs to be approved before we can sell the first unit, sell the first property. It's illegal for developers to build in unapproved subdivisions. If someone wanted to buy two lots side by side and combine them, would that be considered a major change? One owner, two lots, now one? I wouldn't think so, but you may want to check with your local zoning board as it could vary from city to city. Selling lots in an unapproved subdivision. So you're the developer and you're saying, I'm not going to mess with zoning. I think I'm just going to start building. Yeah, that's illegal. You could be looking at prosecution. Obviously, they're going to shut you down. They're not going to pass permits. It's hard to hide that you're building a subdivision. It's just hard to hide that. So somebody from the city is going to drive by and say, what's that? So just go ahead and get it approved. And I want you guys just to look briefly, again, we're not in developer school, so we're not getting too in depth, but just some basic subdivision approval processes on page 117. And there's the big picture. There's 3 steps for subdivision. So the initial planning stage, this is when we're finding the land, making sure it's suitable. Do you plan for this subdivision to be public water and sewer? Are you going to have well water, for example? Making sure you can secure financing, getting approval from the zoning board. Your final planning stage is just finalizing everything, finalizing the plat maps, all the preliminary plans. And then stage 3 is where you and I actually see the big heavy equipment show up and we actually start seeing construction happen. So again, by the time you see construction crews show up, there's been a whole lot of work that's already gone into it for that developer. It's a process, as it should be. As mentioned, one of the big things with subdivisions are the streets. Now, pages 118 to 120, you got italicized. That's actually the subdivision street laws. You're welcome to look over that if you'd like. It's in your book. But bottom line with streets, it comes down to if they're public or private. Now, I'm not talking about whether or not you can drive on them or not. When we talk about public or private, what we're saying is who maintains them. If streets are dedicated as public, That means that the hope is that NCDOT, North Carolina Department of Transportation, will maintain that street. So when there's a pothole, when there's a sinkhole, when it snows, that it's maintained by DOT. Compare that to a private street. If a street has been dedicated for private, then that means the homeowners that live on that street will be responsible for maintaining it. More than likely, they're paying homeowners association dues. Maybe the HOA will impose a special assessment when we have a pothole and it's time to fix it. It's all got to be spelled out in the covenants, and we will talk about covenants in just a second. So this is how streets work. Again, big picture. When a developer comes in, they dedicate the streets as private or public. They set their intention as private or public. If they dedicate the streets as public, DOT is going to tell the developer how they want these streets constructed. How do they want these streets built? DOT is not going to take on maintenance if they don't know how it was built, what kind of materials, the conditions that you can build. There's a lot that goes on in building the street. And DOT is saying, if you want us to maintain it, we need standard across the state or the city, the area, so we know that our equipment can maintain this road. So we've dedicated the street for public, which means the hope is, fingers crossed, when this subdivision is complete, then DOT will accept responsibility. Just because they've been dedicated as public does not mean DOT is going to accept the responsibility. DOT won't come in and accept it until the last house, either in that subdivision or that phase, is complete and all that heavy equipment is out of it. Have you guys ever driven through a new subdivision and you have like space between the curb? The manhole covers still looked raised. That's one way we know that they're still building, because the streets aren't complete. So in order for the developer to get their big heavy equipment in to build, they need to put down a layer of concrete. And that's where we see the raised manhole covers, the space between the curb. Once that last piece of heavy equipment is out, then that's when the developer puts down the final layer of street. That's when that fills in the gap, and then they come in and approve it. Buyer's agents, we need to make sure if that developer is still building that development, help our buyers understand that the hope is that DOT will accept responsibility, but there is no guarantee until the builder is done building, until the developer is done in that either subdivision or phase. It just depends on how big. So y'all don't make promises. And again, this information will also come from the developer. They'll provide us with this. They need to. It's part of their responsibility. But as buyer's agents, it's our responsibility to make sure that they understand. We're going to hope that they accept responsibility. But what happens if DOT doesn't accept responsibility of that public street? What's the only other option there? Then they're private. And private is maintained by the homeowners. This is one of these things in real estate that got really big, really fast, probably about 10 years ago, because there were a lot of subdivisions built in 80s, 90s, and buyers were told, DOT will take care of it. You don't have to worry about it. And for whatever reason, DOT didn't accept that responsibility. So now fast forward 20, 30 years, and these buyers are on the phone with DOT jumping up, or these homeowners are on the phone with DOT jumping up and down on their desk because they're not fixing this pothole. And DOT is going, not our problem to fix, because these streets are private. So when it comes to streets, especially in new subdivisions, I mean, it's in the name, North Carolina Subdivision Street Disclosure Law. What does it mean to disclose? We have this duty to tell. We have this duty to share. And y'all don't make any promises until we know that they've been accepted. The hope is, the plan is that they'll be accepted, but there's no guarantees. And again, they're pretty particular. Like if you want us to maintain it, you're going to build these streets a certain way. I remember my team, we had a development, and it was like, and it's weird, wild that I know this, but it was 2018. And the only reason I remember this is because we had record-breaking rain in 2018. We actually had 2 hurricanes that came through. I want to say like Michael and Floyd or something crazy like that. But we had record-breaking rain. Our development, the entire development of the subdivision was delayed because the dirt was too wet to put down the first layer of concrete to get that equipment in. And we couldn't build the road until the dirt was dry enough. And DOT was checking on it, y'all. They were there on the regular to make sure that we just didn't do it anyway. Because if we did it anyway, they would have said, not our responsibility, this is private. So the developers got to follow those rules to get it accepted. Question comes in, are gated communities always considered private? I can't answer that. It's going to depend on the subdivision. Each particular subdivision is unique. More than likely, but that word always in your question makes me nervous because we know always is one of those absolute words that means every single one of them. So could you have a gated community that's public? Yes, I think more than likely they are private, but I'm not going to say always. So streets are a big deal. Disclosure of streets are a big deal. And again, if you're a buyer's agent helping a buyer buy here, you're communicating either directly with the developer, maybe there's an on-site agent that you're communicating with, but we're helping getting that information to the buyer because buyers deserve to know what they're buying. So for us, when it comes to these subdivisions, regardless of the age, we should always verify whether streets are public or private before representing their status. Never assume. Never say, well, the subdivision next door is private or public, so I'm sure yours are too. Every single subdivision is different. There's got to be a line somewhere. We may or may not know where the line is. It's our duty to make sure we know where that line is. So it doesn't matter if it's a new subdivision or it's been around forever. We have a duty to help verify whether the streets are public or private. Again, a buyer deserves to know what they're buying. So if they're going to be responsible for maintaining the street, they have a right to know that. Yeah, we're having a team meeting with our developer amongst all that rain. And I said, you're telling me that we are on a hold because we're waiting on dirt to dry. Yeah. Yep, that was it. Expect delays with new construction because anything, wet dirt was possible. But we couldn't just keep going, couldn't bring that big heavy equipment on because then that wet dirt would probably sink and now we'd have equipment stuck in the mud, right? All sorts of issues. So DOT says if you want us to maintain these roads, this is how you're going to build it. Also with subdivisions, we have something called the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. This just applies to marketing subdivisions across state line. So if you're advertising or marketing your subdivision, then we need to give the potential buyer the pertinent information, the relevant information. This may not seem like why would we do this now? How many of you on this call, myself included, could remember life before the internet? Anybody with me? Once upon a time ago, we didn't have internet, right? So once upon a time ago, when we didn't have internet and you marketed across those straight lines, it's not state lines. It's not like you could go Google the subdivision. It's not like you could go to Google Earth and look at it, right? Back in those days, you could only rely on the marketing, rely on the advertising. So back in the day is when this law came to be. However, it still applies today because isn't all marketing across state lines? As a matter of fact, all marketing is across the World Wide Web. So we are going across state lines. So we just need to make sure that we're providing potential buyers this information. Under government regulations, let's talk about building codes. Now, building codes are statewide codes. They're not local. Building codes are statewide codes. The whole point of building codes is to set minimum construction standards for safety. General contractors absolutely are a big part in building and developing. They kind of help corral all the subs. So building codes, again, primary purpose, they have minimum construction standards for safety. Building codes set the floor for developers. You build a house however you want to, but you have to at least be in compliance with these building codes. Building codes can and do change over time. Building codes today are not the same as what they were if you were building a house back in the 60s or the 80s for that matter. So as products change, as labor or supplies change, building codes need to update. And to tie this in, zoning is enforced by requiring building permits. So to build, building codes say you have to have a permit. Who do you get a permit from? Your local zoning. And part of the question is going to be, does it comply with the master plan? Does it fit in with our overall projection? A permit is permission. If you have asked for a permit, then you have asked and have been granted permission to build. May that be new construction, may that be major or renovations around your home. I've always heard you need a permit if you're messing with the major components: plumbing, electrical, and structural. So if you're going to do renovations, if you're going to build from the ground up, if you're going to add a room to the back of your house or finish the unfinished basement, and you're dealing with plumbing, electrical, or structural, then a permit is probably required. Now, about this time of the class, I get questions about whether you need a permit or not, and I can't answer that. We don't have time for that. So I reference you to North Carolina General Statute 160D-1110C, which will answer the question for you personally. Jot it down so you can look it up later. If you need a permit to do major renovations on your property, just sending you straight to the source here. So if a permit is permission to build, a certificate of occupancy, also known as a CO, proves that you're in compliance. A CO closes out a permit. If you're building, let's back to that developer, you're building, 20 different properties on this in this subdivision, the city's going to be there on the regular checking on the progress. You're going to have the electrician come in at a certain stage and make sure that everything meets those permits. Plumbing, those permits have been done right. They come in through various stages of the construction to make sure that it was done according to the statewide building codes. Once it's been done to the statewide building codes, then they will release a certificate of occupancy that closes out the permit that says that you are in compliance. So a CO closes out a permit. Not everybody knows that they need to get a permit to build a room on the back of the house or to finish the unfinished basement. Maybe some people know and they don't care. This doesn't apply to me. I'm just going to finish the unfinished basement anyway. As brokers, it's not uncommon to come across unpermitted space. We got to ask some questions, you guys. When you're taking on that listing and you're walking around with the sellers and you guys walk down in the basement and there's walls and carpet and it's nice and finished. Maybe there's even a little half bath off to the corner or something. We got to ask some questions. This is nice. Did y'all do it? The seller says yes. Did y'all get permits pulled? If the seller says no, if we come across unpermitted space, we've got to disclose that it is unpermitted. I'm introducing you here to the first time of something called a material fact. Now hang on to that with me, because we will get more into that on Thursday. But if and when we come across unpermitted space, it's something that we have to disclose. This basement was finished without permits. This room was added to the back of the house without permits. I can include that space in my listing. I can put it in my total heated square footage. Absolutely. What I have to disclose is that that space was unpermitted. I had an acquaintance that bought a house many years ago. And I mean, I was at the housewarming party. You know, I saw the house when she bought it. She bought it as I think it was a 3-bed, 1-bath. Fast forward over the years, she decides she wants to sell. So she calls me and says, I'm thinking about selling. Can you help me out? I said, yeah. So I went over the listing appointment. Of course, I did my research before I went over there. I pulled the public records. I pulled the tax records and the deed and all those good things we can find on the public records. And I saw on the public records, the tax department, that it was a 3-bed, 1-bath. So I knew it when she bought it. I knew what the tax record said about it. I went to the listing appointment and I saw 3-bed and 2 baths. And I said, y'all added a bathroom. And she said, yeah, we took part of this closet and part of this pantry and a little bit of this hall, and we made a bathroom. And I asked a question that I knew the answer to because I saw the tax records. My question was, did you pull permits when you built this bathroom? And she said, no. Had she pulled permits, it showed up on the tax record. Okay, I can advertise it as a 3-bed, 2-bath, but we've got to disclose, we've got to tell that that second bathroom was unpermitted. You may be able to pull permits after the fact. You may be able to contact the permitting office and come in after the fact. But honestly, you guys, once you put this wall up, there's no way to guarantee that the electrical or the plumbing behind this wall is any good. They may have to come in and break down a little piece to get up there and look. They may have to check somehow that what's behind this wall is okay, that it meets those standards. Does a contractor pull permits for you? If it's in their practice, then yes, that's probably part of their job. It may surprise you how many contractors will say, we'll save you money and not pull any permits. Are they really saving you money in the long run? So it's not a bad idea to talk to a couple different contractors, right? Shop around and educate yourself so we know what we're doing. Back to us. The unpermitted space is a material fact, which means I can advertise it, I can promote it, but I have to disclose that it was unpermitted. Can this affect the sale or the value of the home? Absolutely. Because again, we don't know if the electrical and plumbing was done right. And if it's a big enough problem, insurance may or may not have an issue with that as well. So you're not going to, lose value, but it does need to be noted and the buyer needs to be aware of that. Can a buyer request that someone inspect without permit and try to negotiate? The buyer has their own opportunity to inspect. Once we go under contract, we will talk about that in Unit 10. So they can always have the option to have the electrician come in, have the plumber come in and do what they can. But again, once that wall goes up, it's kind of hard to see what's going on behind there, right back there. So our duty, our responsibility for this is just to disclose once we learn. And I don't care how you learn that it's unpermitted. It makes no difference to me. Once we know it's unpermitted, we can't unknow. Once we know something, we can't know it, unlearn it. So if we were to do a nice side-by-side comparison, building codes are construction standards for safety. Zoning regulations are local laws that regulate land use. Building codes are enforced by zoning. So we got to get permission from the zoning board. Once we have that permission to build, then we request permits. Permits are making sure that we're building according to today's building codes. By the way, I didn't get that listing, which is fine. Nobody got that listing. She actually ended up going for sale by owner. I'm not sure if it had anything to do with the bathroom permitting thing or not. But you know what? A good buyer's agent is looking at the same tax record that I looked at. So a good buyer's agent is going to see 3-bed, 1-bath, and their flag is going to go up to ask some questions. Switching gears just a bit, kind of talking about kind of a crappy topic. On-site septic systems. See what I did there? If the property cannot hook up to public sewer, then we need to have an on-site septic system. It's got to go somewhere. So if the property is not hooked up to public sewer, some subdivisions may do a community septic, a neighborhood septic. But if you're not hooked up to anything, then we're dealing with an on-site septic system. These are approved and regulated by the county health department. If you're looking at raw land, one of the first things you need to do is have the land tested to determine if it can hold, if it will support an on-site septic system. If you can't, then you might as well not even build, right? Because it's got to go somewhere. So approved by the county health department. One thing that the county health department does is issue a septic permit or an improvement permit. That permit tells the owner where the on-site septic system should go. Ideally, you want it downhill from the house. We want that water to run down. There might be uses that overload the system. So for example, some septic systems are sensitive to dishwashers and garbage disposals. If we get periods of lots and lots and lots of rain, you might have puddling over the septic system. The other thing that the permit from the county health department will issue is the capacity limit. And in septic permits, the capacity limit is stated as per the number of bedrooms. And the rule of thumb is that the septic system will support 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. Now, we're not talking about your 4-legged family members, but 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. Listing agents. We need to get our hands on that septic permit before we list through the county health department, because we can only advertise the number of bedrooms as listed on the septic permit. So let's say your septic permit says it's a 3-bedroom house. How many people will that septic system support? It's going to support 6, and that's what it's telling us. And guys, when we talk about septic system, we're not just thinking about bathroom water. We're talking like all water that leaves the house. So kitchen water, dishwasher water, washing machine water, right? All the water that leaves the house. That's why it's per bedroom. There's an average use that each person does, and it'll support that number. This is another thing that's gotten really big, really fast in real estate recently, because it wasn't always properly advertised. It wasn't always properly promoted. My teammate went on a listing appointment a couple years ago, and he was talking to the homeowners, and he had the septic permit, And he said, we're gonna have to list this as a 3-bedroom. And they got very angry because when they bought, they told they were bought a 4-bedroom house. It wasn't big then, but things happened, a couple lawsuits, some disciplinary actions, and now we have to follow what the septic permit says. He said, I can only list it as a 3. You guys may see, I've shown property before that advertises a 3-bedroom. And I've been with buyers standing in what could be a perfectly good 4th bedroom. Like why couldn't this be a 4th bedroom? But instead, the listing says 3 bedrooms with an office or 3 bedrooms with a den, for example. You can't advertise 4 if the septic permit says 3. So we've got to make sure we get our hands on that before we list. Question comes in about community septic systems. That's something you can hook up to. Public sewer systems, community sewer systems. These are just on-site. On-site is just for that one property. So 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. We can only advertise the number of bedrooms as stated on the permit. We got a listing. My team has a listing coming the end of the week, and we're, starting to work on it. We got the permit. The permit doesn't have the number of bedrooms. I looked at my agent. I'm like, you got to go back. You got to go back to the county. This is why we pulled a permit, so we can see the number of bedrooms. This doesn't help us. So he called the county again today to try to get that clarified. But we got to get our hands on that so we can see how many bedrooms, because that's how many bedrooms we're allowed to advertise. I hope we get this worked out. We're trying to list it on Friday. I have faith in him. He can do it. So for us, what this means for brokers, we need to verify the number of bedrooms allowed per the permit from the county. You can ask the sellers if they have their septic permit. You can ask the sellers, but if they don't or they can't find it, then we need to get on the phone. You can have it changed if you get you a new septic system. If you get a bigger septic system, then you may be allowed to have more bedrooms. Again, we're trying to support how much water each person uses, 2 human heartbeats. It's strongly recommended to get a soil suitability, also known as a PERC test, if you're buying unimproved land. Don't tell your buyers, oh, I'm sure you can put an on-site septic system in here, because one of the first things they're probably going to find out is that they can't, and they bought that land for nothing. If you're going to live there and you can't hook up to public or community, it's got to go somewhere. So make sure we have that PERC test, part of the buyer's process, to make sure that that's the property they want to buy. A misrepresentation is a lie. Again, more on that when we come to Unit 7, but just to simplify that, a misrepresentation is a lie. As brokers, we can get ourselves in trouble, disciplinary action from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission for misrepresentations, and that does include misrepresenting the number of bedrooms as allowed per the septic permit. Now, remember what I said earlier, you guys. Don't get too bogged down on, oh, where do we get this stuff? That's why you have firms. Once you guys get licensed and affiliated, they'll go through this process with you. You'll probably be checklist it out. So just bear with us. But they'll help you, absolutely, making sure you're looking up the places, looking up the things that you need to before you list. And also if you have an interested buyer. There's also something called straight piping. This is water being directed to a nearby creek or stream. Most common examples where we see this might be like from a washing machine. Maybe the on-site septic system won't support a washing machine, so you straight pipe it. Anytime we see a pipe leaving a house and going down to a nearby creek or stream, that's a material fact. That's something that we have to disclose. I'll leave it up to you if you want to call the authorities or not. But we've got to disclose. And it's, you see a pipe sticking out the back of the house. It's directing something somewhere. Questions? Septic permits? Still on government regulations, talk about areas that are in a declared flood hazard or a flood zone. Whether or not a property is in a flood hazard is determined by FEMA, Federal Emergency Management System or Agency, Federal Emergency Management Agency. You don't need to know. If a property is located in a flood hazard or a flood zone, flood insurance may be required. And I'm going to tell you something right now. Flood insurance is not cheap at all. This is above and beyond your homeowner's insurance. If you have a buyer that is buying at the top of their approval, whatever the lender will allow them to buy, it very well could be that flood insurance tips them over the top, in which case we're not going to get loan approval. So you may want to, you can go various websites. FEMA's got one, North Carolina flood map. And you can pull up maps and see if the area is in a flood zone. Now, I'm not a flood hazard expert. All I can do is look at a map and say, based on this, we may have to deal with flood insurance. But by looking it up, then it can prompt us to investigate, to learn more, get with the insurance agent, get with the lender. They may also, if it's in a flood hazard, it may restrict how the land is used. Like, is it too soggy to build on, for example? I got a whole unit dedicated to insurance, homeowners insurance, and that does include flood insurance. So we'll talk more about that then. Unit 13 is our insurance unit. But for right now, just talking about government regulations, government controls. Another government control is our highway access back to the North Carolina Department of Transportation, NCDOT. If there's planned construction, again, you don't have to go far in the triad to see construction. Where are my Kernersville people? Any K Vegas people? Look at my next screen. No, there you go. Thank you. I got one or two. How long have they been planning that daggone belt loop? They have been talking about that thing for, I mean, I got to the triad in 2000 and they were talking about it, you know? It's been planned for a long, long time. We're just now starting to see it. We're just now getting to where we can drive on pieces of it. It's very exciting. But the fact that it's been planned, the fact that it's been coming, that has been the material fact. Now that it's here and it's being constructed, it's still a material fact. So that list of things that you guys have to look at before you list or when you're helping a buyer, one of those will probably include Googling NCDOT and checking out what kind of planned construction is coming. We've got to disclose planned construction of new highways, freeways, loop. Are they going to widen the road? If it's planned, it's on DOT's website. So we have a duty to verify that, another material fact. And the last government regulation we're going to talk about, let's go down east, closer down east is our wetlands. Maybe more of our swamp areas. The groundwater is at or near the surface, so it floods on the regular. Usually you're not going to build on a wetland because one, the ground's too soggy, but two, they're highly regulated. So there's local controls and regulations statewide and federal as well. Questions on our public land use controls enforced by the government, law enforcement. When we say public, we're saying who enforces it. Somebody just said BRB. You know what? That's a good idea for all of us. Let's take 10. When we come back, we're going to switch gears just a bit and talk about private land use controls. back. How are we for the last hour? I just realized we only had 1 hour left, so y'all stop me at 9:30 if I just keep going. I guess eventually I'll be here by myself and I'll figure it out. All right. Let me go ahead. Cameras are back on and we can see you. So let me go ahead and take attendance. We've talked about our public land use controls. Now let's talk about our private land use controls. And the example we have of a private land use control are our HOAs. Private land use controls, remember, public versus private, it's how it's enforced. So a private land use control is enforced by the local HOA, that HOA in which it's a member of. Covenants, just think of these are the rules for that subdivision. They got several different things they can be called. Doesn't that make it fun? Real estate's one of those things that we can call the same thing one of 3 different things. So it just depends on who you're talking to, maybe where you're at. Thank you for letting me know that you're back and have taken attendance. So private land use controls are set forth by covenants. Covenants are created by the developer when they are developing the subdivision. Once the developer builds the last house and leaves, the covenants remain. Covenants are pertinent. What does that mean? They run with the land. So the very first person to buy in this subdivision has to follow the covenants. The second, the 50th, the 500th, they run with the land. So the developer creates them and they remain when the developer leaves. The whole purpose of covenants are supposed to be to preserve value, to maintain certain standards in the neighborhood or the HOA. Understand, every single set of covenants is different. Some are more strict than others. Some are more regulated than others, but they're all different. We'll talk about our responsibilities in just a second. It's been my experience that people either want to be in an HOA with covenants or they don't. So that might be a good conversation to have with buyers. If they say, I'm not sure, then they may want to see a couple properties in both. But if you have a buyer look at you and say, I will not live in an HOA with covenants, then don't show them properties in there because they can't come in and change it. You're not going to be able to come in and change the game because you don't like them. I'm pretty sure when I flip this slide, I could take this class and divide us into 2 different categories. Those of you that looked at that pink house and went, ew, look at that house, versus the rest of us that went, ooh, look at that house. Depending on how you responded may answer the question whether or not you want to be in an HOA. If you don't want to live across the street from the Pepto-Bismol house, then you may want to purchase in a neighborhood with an HOA. Again, some are more strict than others, but common things that we find with covenants might be certain colors, exterior colors that are allowed. And I'm pretty sure bubblegum pink is not going to be on the approved list unless you're just a kooky covenant. There might be standards on the type of mailbox you have. There might be standards on if you can park on the street or not. There might be standards. Some tell you the grass in your front yard can't exceed a certain height. You know, they're just different standards to help preserve the value, maintain the standards, and preserve the value. Typically, what we see with covenants, things that just require regular property maintenance. There may be a restriction, architectural details. Again, you may be only able to paint your front door 1 of 3 shades, for example, 1 of 3 colors. Issues on or restrictions on parking or fencing. Guys, this fence is so important. Remember what we said back in Unit 4. The only thing you know by looking at a fence is that somebody put a fence there. It's so common to be showing property and you're out back with your buyer, and the buyer looks at the house 3 doors down and they say, oh, good. I was wondering if we could have a fence, but I see the guy down there has a fence, so I know we can. Just because the guy 3 doors down has a fence doesn't mean it's allowed. You don't know. They might be in the throes of the legal battle with the HOA to take that fence down. They might be being fined X amount every day that the fence is up. So just because you see a fence, just because you see a shed, just because you see something is no guaranteed that it's okay, especially if you're in a subdivision or an HOA. So when your buyer says, I want a fence, remember, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. So I have a duty to help them get their hands on the covenant so we can ensure that that fence is allowed. Don't assume. Don't do it because the Joneses are doing it. The Joneses are idiots sometimes, right? We spent so much time trying to keep up with them. We got to help them get their hands on those covenants so they can verify that for sure. So like we said, these covenants are imposed by the developer. There's either an owners association that handles it, a property management company, owners association, or there's individual property owners. Everybody takes turn being president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, right? And everybody takes turns doing this. The HOA has to spell out how it's enforced. We said covenants are pertinent. I think it's a very commonly missed point, commonly missed questions. The covenants remain. Once the developer has built the very last house and they're out, the covenants will remain. They are appurtenant, which means they run with the land. Covenants cannot be for anything that is illegal. Now, it might have been when the covenant was created back in the day, it wasn't illegal. But if laws change that make it illegal today, then we can't enforce it. For example, if you were looking into subdivision that was built in the 50s or the 60s, they may have a covenant that says there's a certain class of people that can live here. And if you're not this certain class of people, then you can't live here. Fast forward to today, we have federal fair housing laws that make that illegal. Today, they cannot be enforced. We got a whole unit dedicated to federal fair housing. We're going to talk about those protected classes and what that means for us as the broker. That's in Unit 19, if you want to peek ahead. But as laws change, if it makes something in the covenants illegal, then it can't be enforced today. So private land use controls are enforced by the HOA. And again, you guys, they're all different. Just because you saw these set of covenants means absolutely nothing for the neighboring subdivision. If we're going out of the subdivision, a good question comes in, are the rules ever updated, Nicole? The answer to that is yes, but have you ever heard the saying, it takes an act of Congress? This is pretty much what it takes to change a covenant. So it's not something easy peasy, which is why I want you guys to be sure you're not telling your buyers, oh, if you don't like that, you can change that, because it's not always as easy. You got to get, in some cases, you got to get like 100% vote from the owners to change that. And then we got to go to a judge, and then we got to go through the process and da 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 da. So I think bottom line, if you're not pleased with the covenants, don't move into that subdivision. It's pretty simple. If you don't like the rules, do not move into that subdivision. Every once in a while, zoning and covenants conflict. You got zoning rules with local ordinances. You got covenants with private land use controls in the HOA. Chickens. Everybody wants chickens, especially after the egg crisis. Was that just last year? We were paying too much for eggs. Now everybody wants chickens. If you're helping this buyer buy, I need you to check 2 different places. I need you to make sure that chickens are allowed by the city ordinances and the zoning. I also need you to check the private covenants. If you find a difference in the two, the more restrictive will prevail. Will you guys please put real estate aside for a second? Just pretend like real estate doesn't exist for 1 second. Anytime you have conflicting laws, conflicting rules, the stricter of the two, which one is more strict? And that's the one that will win. So if zoning allows chickens, but covenants do not, can that buyer have chickens? Not in that subdivision, because the covenants say no, they are more strict than the zoning. All right, bring real estate back. So public zoning and covenants may differ. And again, this is what we're helping our buyers do, is put the hands on the information so they can make that decision. So when it comes to covenants, what's this mean for us? Or just anything, not just covenants, excuse me, anything that we've talked about in Unit 6. We want listing agents. We want to make sure you review those land use controls before you list the property. Buyer's agents, we want to make sure we review those before we help our buyer write an offer. Now we're going to get into this process of writing an offer and negotiating and countering and all that good stuff comes in units 9 and 10. So please bear with me. But we have a duty to verify these land use controls, help those buyers know what they're buying. Remember, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. So helping them verify that the end use will be allowed. I don't know what I don't know. So if my buyer doesn't tell me that they don't have plans to convert the garage to a hair salon, there's nothing I can do for them. However, once they tell me, I now know, and I now have a duty to make sure that their end use will be allowed. Sometimes we got to ask questions. Sometimes people are shy. Sometimes people aren't sure if they can trust us. Sometimes we got to dig to help get that information so we can help them. With that being said, we can't be ostriches and hide our head in the sand and pretend we didn't hear it. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you know about it, you cannot unknow about it. When it comes to any of our land use controls, zoning, covenants, we are not attorneys. I'm a fact finder. My job is to help get them the information so they can make an informed decision. I am not interpreting these documents for them. I'm going to help them find the covenants. Of course I am. But when my buyer looks at me and says, what does this mean? I either need to get them to the HOA or I need to get them to an attorney and have an attorney interpret that information. Stay in your lane. We cannot interpret legal documents. I can provide them, but I cannot interpret them. Now I'm going to go off book for just a second. These next few slides are just straight from the syllabus. Again, you got my PowerPoints. Have you guys found those in the online learning system? Several of you, good. So you have it, but we're not in the book for the moment because we've got to talk a few more about our roles with these land use controls. And one of the big things we want to do is advise consumers, help educate the consumers on what they're selling and what they're buying. If your buyer is buying in an HOA, an owners association, then we have a duty to let them know there's going to be dues involved. Are they X amount per month, per year? However that's spelled out. Are there special assessments? As we've been saying, if these land use controls can affect their end use or how they enjoy the property, then we have that duty to advise them. We want to try to get, specifically for buyers, we want to try to get these in their hands before they submit the offer. Now, I understand some markets are more swift than others. A couple of years ago, that was awfully challenging. If you guys were aware of the real estate market a couple of years ago, homes were available for like 10 hours. They weren't even on the market for 24 hours. We had to move fast. Yes, if you wanted in, you had to move fast. But guys, no matter how swift the market is moving, it doesn't negate my brokerage duties. It doesn't negate my responsibility of getting the buyers the information that they need. So we want to try to get them in their hands, especially if they have an end use. I want a fence. I want chickens. I want whatever. We need to help them make sure that that end use is allowed. Also as brokers, again, we're starting to introduce you guys to our roles and our responsibility. And one of the biggest things that we always need to be on alert for are our little red flags. Little red flags are alerting us that we need to ask questions. Little red flags are alerting us that we need to investigate. Again, we cannot be ostriches. I can't hide my head in the sand and pretend like I didn't hear it or see it or whatever. We are constantly on the alert for little red flags. What that little red flag is telling me is, whoa, 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 slow down. You need to investigate. You need to help your buyer or seller investigate and learn more. I'm a fact finder. I help them gather the information so they can make an informed decision. I'm not the one buying this house. I'm not the one possibly taking on a 30-year mortgage. That's a huge commitment. We're going to help them be able to make that decision. We've got to be on the lookout for our little red flags. Just real quick, the last piece of Unit 6, it's estimated that about 30% of the continental United States is owned by the government. So there's about 30% of this country that we can't help buyers sell and buy. About 30%, and this is used for various things, our parks and state legislative houses and military, etc. Again, we won't be called probably to do much with this, but just kind of an FYI. And that gets us through Unit 6. So those key terms, again, those zoning terms, back on page 109, do not forget about the glossary in the back. Sometimes that's more helpful than trying to read it in the book. The book can get wordy sometimes, I know. So if you need to simplify, back up. You got the glossary. You guys also have Google. You can look a word up. Y'all know how Google works though, right? Take it with a grain of salt. Make sure it's looking up the right thing, not just what it wants to. Key point review for Unit 6 is on page 128, and then that student quiz on page 130. I also have in the online learning system in Unit 6, remember we looked at that Q&A brochure for condos and townhomes in Unit 2? I got another Q&A brochure for you guys. It's on subdivisions, streets, planned communities, that kind of thing. So I think that's a great, again, it comes straight from the Real Estate Commission. So I think that's a great tool to help you guys better understand subdivisions. I like those Q&A brochures a lot. They were written to the public, for the public, but they're very helpful in helping us understand as well. Questions on Unit 6? Yeah.
Quick question. On the permit for septic, are those public records, or you have to call the county?
You got to call the county. They don't have those on record. But if you call the county and say, I'm trying to get a permit for 123 Main Street, they're used to us calling. And it might be, Benjamin, you might have an older home. Maybe it was built back in the 50s or 60s, and they don't have the permit because back in the 50s and 60s, 70s, we didn't have an online system to store stuff, right? So it might be that we have to have the county health department come out and inspect it and issue a new permit. But that's why we want to get on that early in the listing process so we know what we can list it for, how many bedrooms we can list it for. But yeah, they're at least the ones in the triad. I don't know about, Charlotte or Raleigh, but at least here, those county health departments are very, very helpful.
And you have to inform your buyer about, let's say they had an unfinished basement and the buyer was thinking about, hey, I can turn it into this or turn it into that. You have to inform him that he needs to get permit for those things.
No, we just have to disclose that that basement was finished without permits. It's unpermitted space. So
Okay.
what the buyer chooses to do with that when they buy, that's on them. I'm just telling them this basement was not finished with permits. Okay. Graham, we got to call somebody. We don't have, maybe we should take lessons from Dare County, but I know around here, we're calling somebody. So each county is going to be different. There's 100 counties in North Carolina, right? So they could all just be a little bit different. And again, we're the experts of our market. We're the experts in the county that we're working in. LaJoy, we're going to talk about that next. Yep, absolutely. I get unit 6 is not the most exciting unit. It's like all those words and terms and stuff. You know, you're not going to get a whole bunch of test questions from unit 6, but you will get some. And again, it comes down to that basic understanding of public versus private subdivisions and those zoning terms. Okay. Up next. That's the only one I know of, Roderick. Skipping around just a bit. Like I said, we start skipping. So now we're going to go to the back of the book, page 521, unit 20, our environmental issues. We're not doing anything state specific here. So this would all be national. How many of you got a chance to look at unit 20 before tonight? A good amount of you. Unit 20 is the unit that makes you terrified to breathe the air that you breathe, doesn't it? There is some scary, scary stuff going on in unit 20. So let's talk about those super scary things. So our roadmap, we're going to talk about some basic environmental hazards and what this means to us, what we need to be aware of. So environmental issues are a factor of growing importance in all real estate transactions. Environmental issues are health issues. Health issues deal with people. As real estate agents, we are dealing with people. So why is this important to us? Because we're dealing with people in these real estate transactions. And the big picture of this unit, the thing to really understand is the importance of accurately disclosing what we know. So once we learn of an environmental issue, we're not expected to have the technical skills necessary to diagnose environmental issues. But a lot of these things we're going to talk about, we can see, we can smell, we can, you know, look for things. And our little red flags should be going up, alerting us all over the place. Turn with me page 523, or the second page into unit 20. And there's a picture of a house. Now, I don't know of any property that has everything, but this picture of the house just kind of shows us like where we might find some of these environmental concerns. Generally speaking, when we're dealing with environmental issues, the great place to start is with the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency. After class, you can Google EPA's website. When you're helping your buyer or seller learn more about this information, EPA is almost always a great place to start. Also in this unit, we're going to talk a little bit more about material facts. I don't want you guys to think that I'm not making material facts important. When we get to unit 7, we're going to make material facts super important. But for right now, when we talk about material facts, let's just recognize that what we're saying is any fact that a reasonable person would recognize as relevant when making a decision to buy or sell. It's material. It has substance. It's something of importance. So just easing you into it. We'll get all into material facts. So specifically, some environmental issues that we need to be on alert for to see if our little red flags go up. And the first environmental issue is asbestos. Asbestos was a mineral. It's once used in insulation. You can see it here wrapped around this pipe. We stopped using asbestos in 1978. Now, you don't need to know that year as it relates to asbestos. The deal with asbestos, if it's intact, it's fine, no issue. The problem with asbestos is when it becomes friable. Once it becomes friable, the little particles break up and get into the air. We breathe that air, so those little particles get into our lungs. And long-term exposure of asbestos can lead to serious respiratory issues, possibly lung cancer. Have you guys heard the commercials? I never say this right, but if you or someone you know has been exposed to asbestos and has mesothelioma, is that close enough? That's what we're talking about here. We're dealing with asbestos. Removal may not be the best method because when you remove it, you break it up, you make it friable. So it might be that the best method is encapsulation, in which the asbestos experts, not you and I, but the asbestos experts come and wrap this insulation back around the pole of the pipe so it's not friable, so it's not getting those particles into the air. Another environmental concern that we come across in real estate, and this is the one that we need to know the most, the best about, is lead. You may have lead-based paint. You may also have dust from lead pipes or solder. Solder is what connects two metal pipes or so lead in the home. Lead poisoning can cause damage to brain, nervous system, kidneys, red blood cells. Lead poisoning, though, affects children. Those little developing bodies, those little developing organs, those are the ones that are susceptible to lead poisoning. So children and then women with child, those unborn, may be suspect to it as well. So the whole point from the EPA is to help educate the consumer about the possible dangers to long-term exposure to children. EPA has a pamphlet, a booklet that we can use, that we can provide to our buyers and tenants. It's called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. Your firm will get copies of that in your hand. But we use lead in our building products for many, many years until we realized it was bad, until we realized the damage that it did. So in 1992, we got an act that banned lead. And what this act said was that anything built prior to 1978 may be susceptible to lead in the home. Understand what this is not saying your home was built prior to 1978, so it's got lead. What this is saying is because the home was built prior to 1978, it may have lead. Let us help educate you. You need to know this year as it relates to lead. 1978, write that down for me real big. Lead, anything built prior to 1978. So what the act tells us is that all residential sales and leases dealing with buyers and tenants, we have a lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum that's required on anything built prior to 1978. Again, I'm not telling you it's got lead. What this is telling you is that because of the year your home was built, it may have lead. Once we realized it was bad for us, we stopped building with it. Same thing with asbestos. Once we realize it's bad and the harmful effects for its way in, and they could ban it like they did lead and asbestos. Target housing, EPA defines any residential built prior to 1978. There are a couple exceptions to target housing. Any housing built prior to 1978 that was built for or designed for the elderly would be exempt from target housing. Remember, we just said lead affects developing organs. It's not going to affect those that have developed. So housing for elderly does not fall under target housing. Another exception is 0-bedroom dwellings. What I mean by a 0-bedroom dwelling is like a studio apartment, a dorm room, military barracks, for example. One thing that the Act tells us, that the addendum gives us, anyone that's selling or leasing is required to disclose the presence of known lead in the home. Nobody can disclose what they don't know. If the seller or the owner has never had it tested, they may or may not know that there's lead in the paint. And no, you cannot slap a new coat of paint on it and the lead goes away. It remains forever, no matter how many coats of paint you put on it. We can only disclose, or the owner can only disclose what they know. In North Carolina, we're going to learn in Unit 7, in North Carolina, homeowners don't have to disclose much. This is like the exception. If they know of lead in the home, but again, they can only disclose what they know. If they contracted, if they paid somebody to paint, that contracted work should know to have it tested. However, what if they're do-it-yourselfers? What if they paint themselves? Maybe they know to have it tested, maybe they don't. So once again, we can only disclose what we know. If we have had it tested, or if the homeowner has had it tested, then they have reports that they would be expected to provide for buyers and tenants. Tenants come with kids too, right? So if it's target housing, we want to help educate the consumer on that. So these people that are doing these renovations, repairs for compensation on anything built prior to 1978 must be certified. They should have it tested. Failure to do so, they could be popped $750 per day by the state. They could have fines $32,500 per day by the EPA. Don't get bogged down in those numbers. Just know that there's consequences. If this contracted paid help, paid painters, doesn't have it tested, doesn't follow the lead-based paint hazard management program, yes, the contractors, yep. Those painting for compensation, renovations, repairs for compensation. So again, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, you may or may not know you could have had it tested. If you're doing this for compensation, you know you're certified. The only way to have it tested is to chip off some of the paint and send it into a lab. I think most contractors are respectful and try to chip like usually window frames and door frames are the most common areas to find this lead. So they're not going to do it like smack dab in the middle. They try to do it like underneath where it's not too much of an eyesore. But yeah, that's the only way to have it tested is to chip it off, send it in. If it comes back with lead, then it has reports that the seller is required to disclose and share that information with buyers or tenants. So when it comes to lead and lead disclosures, what does this mean for us? We've got to disclose what we know. Once we learn about the presence of lead in the home, we have a duty to disclose. We have a duty to tell. We also have a duty to make sure that the owner is in compliance with the lead laws. They are disclosing, and help them or provide them with the addendum. We only look at a few forms in this class, so we're not going to look at this one. We'll talk about it again briefly when we get to Unit 20, but this is not one we're going to look at. But just to give you an idea, it gives the seller or the owner the opportunity. It says, I know of lead in the home, or I do not know of lead in the home. And then it asks the owner to provide any reports, make those reports available. So our duty as the broker is to make sure that they're in compliance, make sure that they provide any reports for anything that they know. Buyer's agents, we want to help educate our buyers and tenants, getting them that EPA booklet in their hand and helping them understand the possible risks of lead in the home. Questions on lead? Agents, red flag, little red flag. When you're researching a property and the tax records that it was told you it was built prior to 1978, then we know we need to use this addendum. Again, it doesn't tell you it's got lead in the home. It says because of the year it was built, it may have lead in it. We're just educating the consumers. Another environmental issue is radon. Radon is a gas caused naturally by decaying matters in the ground. And as those buried matters decay, they release a gas. The gas goes up into the atmosphere. The problem with radon is when those decaying matters are under the property. And the radon gas may have nowhere to escape but into the home. So having the property tested for radon is recommended. The buyer can do that during their due diligence that we'll talk about in Unit 10. They can choose to have the property tested for radon. If the radon test comes back 4.0 picocuries or more, that is considered undesirable, and a mitigation system is suggested, recommended to resolve the issue. What you're looking at in this picture is a mitigation system. So it's drilled into the home, into the crawl space. There are a bunch of little, I don't know, a bunch, but there are several different fans in this pipe that is pulling the air out of the home, out of the crawl space here, pulling it out of the home, out into the atmosphere where it belongs. A radon test. You can get home kits. You can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and get a home kit. Buyers would be encouraged to have, radon tested by usually our home inspectors can test. What they do is come in the home and set up these little contractions, and the contraction takes like a radon measure every hour. So every hour it says what the radon level is. And they run this test for 2 or 3 days. And at the end of those 2 or 3 days, they get an average. If that average is more than 4.0 picocuries, then the mitigation system is recommended. Ventilation can help as well. If you're a vacant home, homes are meant to breathe. They're meant to have people come and go. They're meant to have the heat and the AC kick on, right? Homes are meant to breathe. Windows are meant to open. Doors are meant to open. So if you have a vacant home that's closed up for days or weeks on end, it may be just naturally you have a higher radon level because people haven't been coming or going. New construction. Man, our new construction, we are building like tightly sealed houses these days. So radon may be issues with new construction. I know a lot of builders are building homes with a radon mitigation system in place. Buyers should always be encouraged to have a radon test as part of their due diligence, whether there's a mitigation system in place or not, because these little fans don't last forever. So they say every like 5 or 8 years, we should have this tested. I had buyers once, and there was a radon mitigation system, and the system itself was in the basement. And we walked up to it, we looked at it, we pointed at it, we had a conversation about it. And I talked to my buyers about this, and they said, it's like, $150, something like that. What's that in the big picture of buying a house? And they were like, yeah, we'd like to have it tested. And it came back at 6 something. So I called the listing agent called the sellers called their radon guy. The radon guy came out, and sure enough, those little fans had stopped working. They don't last forever. So the radon guy replaced the fans, had it retested, and now we were back down to 2 something. But had they never had it tested, because you can't smell this gas, you can't see it, the only way to know that it's there is if you have it tested. Let's see, when the homes are inspected, are these tests included? No, they would be in addition to the home inspection. So we would need to encourage the buyer to add that. Is this still an issue for homes built without a basement? I would say this is a bigger issue for homes built without a basement, because now you don't have that basement crawl space to, help ventilate, help keep it from coming up into the main living. But if we look here, radon's everywhere, you guys. It is everywhere. This map was from 2017, but still, it kind of gives us an idea. Radon's more common when we get to the mountains than it is down east. I mean, think about the difference in the ground in the mountains versus the coast. There's more sand. It's more absorbent down at the coast. Not saying they don't have radon issues, but the closer we get to the mountains, and we're smack dab here in the Triad. I mean, Winston is just known for higher levels of radon. And it might be that it doesn't test today, but it does a couple of years from now. Again, as things decay in the ground, matters decay in the ground, that's what causes the radon. So if you had it tested when you bought, like I said, you may want to consider, even if you have a radon mitigation system, you may want to consider have it testing again. I attended a class last year where they had a radon guy, and it was pretty interesting. But we specifically asked about those home testing kits, and he said they're really good to help you get started. So they're really good to give you an idea if you have a problem or not. So if you run out to Lowe's and get one of those and it tests high, that should alert you to know to call the radon specialist and have them do their tests. But it's everywhere. And it might be that this house tests 1 point something, but the guy next door tests 8 point something. So there's that gas is just looking for cracks in the ground to escape. And if those cracks in the ground happen to be under your home, then radon's getting into the home. So have it tested if you wish. Our role as brokers and what the North Carolina Real Estate Commission says, we are required to disclose the presence of radon 4.0 picky carriers or higher. In other words, 4.0 picky carriers or higher, it becomes a material fact that we have to disclose. Now, if we see a radon mitigation system, that's not necessarily a material fact, but it should raise our little red flag and encourage us to ask questions. And I would ask questions like, when was the last time the owners had it tested? Because if it's been 8 years, I don't know if those little fans are still working. You know what I'm saying? So when we see that radon mitigation system, we're not going to get excited. We're not going to guarantee there's no radon in the home. But it should raise our little red flag and encourage us to encourage our buyers to investigate, learn more about it. Another environmental concern or issue is formaldehyde. This is usually a glue, maybe a glue found in furniture. It can also be found in pressed wood products. So think like plywood, particle board, things like that. May also be found in foam. I said it's a glue, I'm sorry, it's a gas. Formaldehyde was banned in 1982, but then it was later reduced to a warning because sufficient evidence that it caused damage couldn't be proven. We're still using formaldehyde today. If you buy furniture, I don't know if anybody's involved with the High Point Furniture Market. We got that coming in. I know Vegas Furniture Market is going on this week. I don't know why I know that, but Vegas's furniture market is going on this week. So they're dealing with that in furniture. I had a student in pre-licensing last year say that she bought a new bed frame. And with that bed frame came a red sticker that said warning, possibly, formaldehyde. So just heads up, letting her know. So again, that warning was reduced to a caution, or that ban was reduced to a caution. Ventilation is usually a good proper ventilation. Is usually a good, any of these gases or stuff. But with that being said, we still don't want to ignore the issue. Little red flag goes up. Another environmental concern are our underground storage tanks. This is another thing that got really big in real estate several years ago. These underground storage tanks, many are abandoned. These underground storage tanks are usually steel, and over time that steel corrodes. And as the steel corrodes, the contents of the underground storage tank will leak out to the ground, get into our groundwater, which could eventually get into our drinking water. Things that we have in these underground storage tanks are like oils, as brokers, if you're out showing property or if you're with an owner and you got a pipe sticking out of the ground, you're walking in somebody's backyard and you trip over a pipe, that pipe's going somewhere. Usually where it's going is straight to an underground storage tank. Like we said, though, a lot of the times these things are abandoned. We weren't always as educated as what we are today. And there was a time where we thought the solution to abandoned storage tanks was just to bury them. Out of sight, out of mind, right? No problem. Well, like we said, now those steel tanks are corroding, the contents are leaking out. And this is the tough pill to swallow. If those contents leak, they source it back to where it originated, that owner is liable. That owner is responsible for the cleanup. Even if it's an abandoned tank by the previous owner, maybe the previous owner didn't know about it because, unless anybody's walking around with a metal detector or a shovel, there's no way to know that those abandoned tanks are there. It's not a problem until it's a problem. And now we got a problem. So the current owner is always responsible for cleanup. Now, here's the good news. There are programs out there to assist. It might be we have to dig it up. It might be we can somehow clean up or removal. There are laws and programs out there to assist. So it's not like they're stuck with this cleanup all on their own, but it is still not a fun process. So again, as agents, we're looking for pipes sticking out of the ground. If they say, yeah, we haven't used that tank, what do we do with it? Kitty litter and a funnel is not going to take care of it. So we need to contact the proper authorities to have it properly. And this is where that North Carolina Leaky Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Act that you can read more about on page 534 or the end of Unit 20. near the end of Unit 20. We've got to disclose what we know. You guys make a note. There's a fascinating story. Please don't do it now because I only got like 5 more minutes left with you guys. But there's a fascinating story on page 529 about a whole town that was negatively impacted by underground storage tanks. Don't do it now, please. Stay with me for like 5 more minutes. But just goes to show you how severe these things can get. So with underground storage tanks, what's our role? If we know, we have to disclose. We're hearing a common theme. We disclose what we know. So if you know of a current or previous, again, maybe you trip over the pipe in the backyard. Maybe the seller says we chose to have this tank buried. We just have to disclose the known presence of a tank. If we do know of a tank, buyers should be encouraged to inspect that tank. If it's still in use, especially. They're not all abandoned. Some of them are still currently in use. So that should be part of the buyer's due diligence to have that tested, to learn about that. Another thing we run into, environmental concern we run into, is mold, specifically toxic mold. Mold, the range of mold, you guys. Mold could be on the bread, that loaf of bread you've had too long, the whole way to black toxic mold, and several other variations in between. So mold is a very broad word, a very broad term. Exposure to mold, breathing in mold could have respiratory issues because, again, you're breathing in. Mold can grow anywhere. I know, Nicole, this unit just blew. You guys walk outside after this unit, take a big deep breath of the fresh air, right? It's scary. It's a scary unit. Y'all watch something easy on TV before you go to bed. I don't want anybody to have nightmares over this tonight. So mold can grow anywhere. It just needs a little bit of moisture, a little bit of oxygen. It does not need much to grow, and it doesn't need much to grow rapidly. So we can find it anywhere. Possible red flags for us could be previous leaks or floods, water damage. There's a good chance that water damage can leave behind some mold. If you walk into a basement, down into a basement, you say, it smells basement-y. There's no scent that's basement-y. What you're smelling is some kind of mold or mildew product. And again, I'm not a mold expert. I can't walk in that basement and be like, oh, this is a green mold you have. I'm looking for red flags. So when you smell something that smells basement-y, there should be a red flag to go up. Encourage your buyer to investigate. They can also have that tested. The home inspector can help us out. If they can't do it, they can point us in the right direction. So when it comes to mold, what do we need to know? The mere presence of mold. Mold's everywhere. Remember that big deep breath y'all just took? You probably just breathed in some mold. It is everywhere. So I don't have anything to disclose unless it's in excessive amount. If you can smell it in the basement, if you can see it, I may have mold behind this wall. I hope I don't, but I may have mold behind this wall. You walk in this room, I don't see anything. I can't smell anything. The only thing to know for 100% sure would be to get my crowbar and bust into this wall. We're not going to do that, but we need to be on alert if we do walk in, see something, smell something. And we need to be able to identify those signs. Again, leaks, flood, any kind of prior water damage may be a sign, is our little red flag to go up and encourage us to ask some questions and disclose what we know. If the seller doesn't disclose there's black mold and the buyer moves in and find it, is there anything that protects the buyer about mold removal? That buyer needs to call their attorney. Like we said, in North Carolina, the seller doesn't have to disclose much. However, as brokers, we have to disclose everything. So the seller may not disclose that there's black mold, but that's something that we would be able to see and smell. So now we have a duty to disclose. After closing, what's the buyer's remedy? Stay in your lane and tell them to talk to their attorney if they have a leg to stand on. So I'm going to call it here. I got just a little bit more to say in Unit 20. It will not take us but 5 more minutes to get through Unit 20. So we'll bust that out pretty quickly on Thursday. After that, we're going to Kahoot. So bring your phone so we can play in Kahoot. Once we do that, then we're going to get going into Unit 7. How many of you got a chance to start looking at Unit 7 over the weekend? A few of you. Okay, good. If you didn't, then please try to look at it. We're going to get into that. We talked about the importance of Unit 7. We'll talk about it again on Thursday. So that's where we are. Finish 20, Kahoot, and then on to agency, which is why I think you guys thought you were here anyway. So we're finally going to learn what that word means and what it means to be an agent, take care of buyers and sellers and all that good stuff. Yay, moving on from radon and zoning and blah. We've given you enough information that now we can start talking about what it means to be an agent. So that's what we have to look forward to on Thursday. You guys have a great night, and I will see you Thursday night.